Chapter 146. I remember. Mo Xiaoyao, of course, remembered. That year, Guan Piyu led troops to attack Pan Long Mountain. He was obstinate and didn't listen to his subordinates' advice. In just 3 days, he lost over 1,000 soldiers, but they didn't even touch the outskirts of Pan Long Mountain. Coincidentally, Mo Xiaoyao was out on an errand and passed by the area, so he went to take a look. He happened to hear Guan Piyu confidently ask soldiers to be meet shields to attack the mountain. Mo Xiaoyao's temper back then was much worse than it was now. He immediately whipped Guan Piyu. Of course, Mo Xiaoyao was also severely punished by his elder brother after the incident. Find a way to change him. I don't want to see that idiot stay in Shattering Snow Pass, Mo Xiaoyao said. I'm afraid not. He's one of Mo Jingqi's study companions, as well as his confidant. I'm sure Mo Jingli left him in Shattering Snow Pass to guard against Mo Jingli. Feng Zhiyao shrugged. Mo Xiaoyao calmly glanced at him. Feng-san, make that idiot leave Shattering Snow Pass in a month. I don't care what method you use. Receiving Mo Xiaoyao's threatening gaze, Feng Zhiyao immediately put away his frivolous expression. With a serious expression, he almost swore to the heavens, "Yes, Your Highness. I think Mo Jingli should be very interested in Guan Piyu. But, who will guard Shattering Snow Pass if we change the pass? Our men definitely can't. Mo Jingqi won't be reassured." General Murong, Mo Xiaoyao pondered for a moment before speaking. General Murong has already stayed in the capital for 2 years. Although Mo Jingqi says he sympathizes with General Murong's hard work guarding the border, you and I both know that it's not a good thing for a general to stay in the capital for a long time. It'll only weaken his spirit. Mo Jingqi wouldn't suspect General Murong as well, right? Feng Zhiyao asked. Otherwise, General Murong was much stronger than that trash Guan Piyu. Why would he leave a general who could win battles idle and use an idiot? No, he's just more trustworthy than General Murong. You go and think of a way to get Guan Ziyi back. I will deal with General Murong's matter. No problem. Prince. After sending off Feng Zhiyao, the small study returned to its original tranquility. Yi Li lazily leaned back in her chair as she watched Mo Xiaoyao continue to study the map on the table. After being together for so long, Yi Li understood this man. This man seemed to be very used to preparing for a rainy day, and he thought much more than ordinary people. Aren't you tired? What if what you're thinking doesn't happen? Mo Xiaoyao raised his head to look at her and smiled faintly. It would be best if nothing happened. If you tire yourself to death, what about the rest? Mo Xiaoyao smiled as he put away the map on the table. I never planned to tire myself to death. Besides, don't I have Li to help me now? Also, I only do what I need to do while I'm still alive. If I really die, what does this world or Da-Chu state become have to do with me? Yi Li was speechless. Ever since Mo Xiaoyao discovered that she was faster and more effective at handling the accounts than him, he used the excuse of not feeling well and refused to accept the accounts. No matter if it was the inner palace or the outer court, he even threw the accounts of the Mohist army to her to handle. This further made Yi Li understand why the imperial family was so wary of the Ding King's residence. After more than a month, Yi Li was certain that the Ding King's residence was not necessarily richer than the national treasury, but Mo Xiaoyao was definitely richer than Mo Jingqi. Although the Mohist army was still supported by the imperial court, Yi Li believed that even if the imperial court did not provide the Mohist army and the Black Cloud cavalry with rations, the Ding King's residence would still be able to support these two armies. Just by looking at the accounts that Mo Xiaoyao threw to her, it was clear that there were gold, silver, copper mines, and large amounts of land and industries all over the Da-Chu state. When an emperor knew that he was poorer than his officials, how could he not be envious and jealous? The Ming dynasty's Shen Wansan had set a very good example for the future generations. Just as the emperor and the empress dowager were fighting both openly and covertly in the court, the Yunhui general Guan Rong, who was guarding Shattered Snow Pass, accidentally fell off the back of his horse when he was hunting. Furthermore, his beloved horse broke one of his legs. This matter seemed insignificant, but it faintly made the situation between the emperor and Li Wang even more tense. As for who would be the new general of Shattered Snow Pass, it set off another wave in the imperial court. However, the Ding King's residence that stirred up these undercurrents was still independent of the people's sight, appearing quiet and comfortable. In the elegantly decorated and comfortable bedroom, a middle-aged man in his 50s sat by the bed, holding Mo Xiaoyao's hand and carefully taking his pulse. The middle-aged man had a scholarly appearance, but his eyes faintly revealed a sharp light. Between his brows, there was a trace of carefree pride. Although he was a doctor, he looked more like a wanderer wandering the world. Prince said that the prescription he wrote last year is no longer effective. The middle-aged man frowned. Dr. He, who usually treated Mo Xiaoyao, also stood to the side and said, "That's right. Last year's prescription completely lost its effectiveness when winter came this year. Mr. Shen, Prince's illness." The middle-aged man, who was Shen Yang, the imperial doctor of Da Chu State, frowned and said, "Let me see the current prescription." Dr. He quickly handed over the prescription that Mo Xiaoyao had recently taken. Shen Yang looked carefully and raised his eyebrows. "This prescription is good. However, I am very surprised that you didn't add any painkillers." Since taking over Mo Xiaoyao's treatment, Shen Yang was familiar with Dr. He, a former military doctor, and naturally understood his habit of using medicine. When Mo Xiaoyao's illness acted up, no one knew better than him and Dr. He how painful it was, other than Mo Xiaoyao himself. Dr. He's heart had always been softer than his, so Shen Yang was surprised that he could endure not giving painkillers. Dr. He said with some shame, "I did add painkillers, but Wang Fei was against it," so Shen Yang finally noticed Yi Li, who had been silently standing to the side. If Yi Li wanted to, her presence could be so small that it was almost negligible. So even though he knew that Prince Ding had married a Wang Fei this year, he hadn't noticed what the Wang Fei standing behind him looked like. Raising his head to look at Yi Li, Shen Yang praised, "Wang Fei's decision is not wrong. Without the painkillers, Prince will suffer a bit more, but there won't be any troublesome side effects. Also, the speed of the poison acting up will be slower than when using medicine. This is why I have always insisted on not using painkillers. This room is well built. If nothing unexpected happens, Prince will have no problems surviving for another 2 or 3 years." When he said this, there was no joy on the faces of the people in the room. Because this meant that Shen Yang's search for the phoenix grass in the Eastern Sea had failed, or that the phoenix grass had no effect on Mo Xiaoyao's body. Dr. He still had some hope as he asked, "Mr. Shen, the phoenix grass?" Shen Yang shook his head with some regret. "The phoenix grass is effective against the cold poison. But it is very disadvantageous to Prince's body. Therefore, it's better to wait until the raging fire lotus seed matures before making any plans. Of course, I will see if there are any other methods in the next 2 years." Mo Xiaoyao leaned against the bed and calmly asked, "Does the phoenix grass have any side effects on the body?" Shen Yang nodded and said, "The phoenix grass can make Prince's body better, but it can't really get rid of the cold poison. Instead, it uses the fire poison to fight against the cold poison. Once it loses control, not only will the cold poison in Prince's body become stronger, it will also add fire poison. At that time, even if we have the raging fire lotus seed, we won't be able to use it." Chapter 147. Dr. He asked doubtfully, "Isn't the fire poison and the cold poison just the opposite of each other?" Shen Yang said unhappily, "It's true that the cold and fire poison are opposite of each other, but not all of them can cancel each other out. In reality, most of the poisons will coexist with each other and they can form a more unpredictable poison." Mo Xiaoyao nodded and said, "Then it's been hard on Mr. Shen this time. Since so many years have passed, there's no harm in waiting for another 2 years. Mr. Shen has just come back and you've already worked so hard. You should go rest first." Shen Yang looked with praise at the calm Mo Xiaoyao. He nodded and said, "This is the first time this one has seen Prince's mental strength. Prince, Wang Fei, don't worry. Even though Shen Yang's skills are not good enough to cure the Prince's poison, before the raging fire lotus matures, Shen Yang can guarantee the Prince's safety. Tomorrow, this one will adjust the prescription for the Prince. This year, the Prince's body has not deteriorated too much. When the weather warms up, there shouldn't be any problems." Yi Li nodded and said, "Thank you for your trouble, Mr. Shen. Chief Steward Mo, take Mr. Shen to the guest room to rest." Chief Steward Mo acknowledged and went forward to invite Shenyang and Dr. He out. The room was silent. Mo Xiaoyao raised his head and saw Yi Li staring at him in a daze. He smiled faintly and said, "Yi Li, don't worry. If the cold poison was so easy to cure, we wouldn't have waited so many years. I originally didn't have much hope." Yi Li sat down by the bed and looked at him. She sighed softly and said, "There's always some disappointment, isn't there?" Mo Xiaoyao was slightly startled. He looked at Yi Li for a while before saying with a bitter smile, "Is it that obvious?" Yi Li did not speak. Mo Xiaoyao reached out and pulled Yi Li into his embrace. Yi Li was not used to it and wanted to reject it, but she gave up on the idea in an instant. She quietly leaned against Mo Xiaoyao and allowed him to imprison her in his embrace. Mo Xiaoyao hugged her tightly, burying his face in her fragrant hair. "Li Li, I can't accept this." Mo Xiaoyao's voice was filled with emptiness and despair. Yi Li frowned slightly and raised her hand to support Mo Xiaoyao's shoulder. She knew that Mo Xiaoyao was never as calm as he appeared to be. If he could really remain calm, then he would not be the Prince Ding who was still devising strategies even though he was bedridden. He would not be far from becoming a saint. If only father and big brother were still around. Give me 5 years and I'll be able to wipe out the entire Xiling. 10 years at most. I'll be able to drive the entire northern tribes to the barren lands in the north. At that time, no one will be able to threaten the peace of the Da state. The Da state can also truly become a more glorious dynasty than the previous one. This has always been the long-cherished wish of the Ding royal family, and also the wish of Emperor Taizu. Why? Why did they do this? Ali, do you know, when I first woke up 7 years ago, I couldn't wait to kill every single one of them. How dare they? How dare they treat Big Brother like that? Mo Xiaoyao hugged Yi Li tightly, his voice low and tired. Father said that he wanted to protect the people of the Da state. Big Brother also said that the peace of the Da state was more important than anything else. But how did they treat us? At that time, I told myself, even if I could never stand up again, I would still kill them. But you didn't kill them, right? Yi Li leaned against him and said softly, "With the strength of the Ding royal family, it might not be possible to resist the entire military strength of the Da state, but if it was a life and death struggle, killing a few people was definitely not a problem." But even when Mo Xiaoyao was at the peak of his anger, he didn't do this. Mo Xiaoyao was silent for a while, then said softly, "I can't. The soldiers of the Mohist army and the Black Cloud cavalry have been in the army for generations, guarding the borders of the Da state. I can't let them bear the charge of treason. If that's the case, what about the sacrifice and perseverance of the Ding royal family and the Mohist army for over 100 years? Yi Li was silent. Perhaps this was the source of Mo Xiaoyao's pain. His intelligence and the strength of the Ding royal family made him skip the process of thinking about who his enemy was. He hated the ruler of this country, and even more, he hated this country. However, he couldn't simply destroy them. In fact, he had to protect them. Protecting the people he hated the most. No matter who it was, this was definitely torture. "Li, there will be a day. I will kill them. Are you scared of me?" Leaning against Yi Li's shoulder, Mo Xiaoyao asked in a low voice. Yi Li lowered her eyes and looked at the bed behind Mo Xiaoyao, softly saying, "Didn't you already know that I'm not a cowardly person? But I know that Li Li is a soft-hearted person." Mo Xiaoyao laughed in a low voice, "If there is a day that Li Li finds out that I'm not a good person, then I might as well tell you first." Yi Li was a little surprised and moved back a little. She saw Mo Xiaoyao looking at her attentively and gently. "Does it matter whether I think you're a good person or not?" Mo Xiaoyao raised his head and softly brushed the hair by her ear. "Of course, Li Li is my princess. Even if one day Li Li finds out that I'm not a good person, I won't let you go." Mo Xiaoyao smiled. That smile seemed to be bright and warm like never before. Yi Li couldn't help but feel a little dazed. She only felt a faint, slightly warm lips gently landing on her own lips. It was just a very light touch, and it seemed to linger for a moment. Then she heard Mo Xiaoyao's laughter in her ear. "Li Li, I will never let you go." There seemed to be a slight numbness on her lips. Yi Li felt that her ability to respond, which she had always been proud of, seemed to have completely stagnated. "Ah, hey, did I agree? Princess, Miss Mu Rong requests an audience." Qing Luan at the door reported in a clear voice. Yi Li suddenly stood up. She looked at Mo Xiaoyao's smiling face and glared at him. She said to the outside, "Invite Mu Rong to the flower pavilion, I'll go immediately." Qing Luan acknowledged and left. Yi Li snorted and turned to leave. Mo Xiaoyao reached out to grab her. Meeting Yi Li's angry eyes, Mo Xiaoyao smiled helplessly. "Li, change your clothes before you go out." Yi Li looked in confusion at the clothes she was wearing. Even though it was slightly casual, it wasn't too rude to go see Mu Rong. Mo Xiaoyao said, "Leng Er definitely came with Miss Mu Rong. I'm a bit tired. Go see him for me." Yi Li saw that Mo Xiaoyao's brows were slightly tired. She then remembered that after Shenyang arrived, Mo Xiaoyao had been tormented for so long. Even though he didn't show it on the surface, but his mood was definitely not small. Her heart softened and she said in a low voice, "I'll go see him. You sleep for a while." Helping Mo Xiaoyao lie down and tucking him in, Yi Li turned to go into the inner room to change her clothes. Mo Xiaoyao laid on the bed and watched Yi Li's departing figure, a faint smile on his lips. "Li, you're so soft-hearted that I don't want to let go. So, even if you don't like me, I won't give you a chance to regret it." In the parlor, Mu Rongting looked at the elegant furnishings in the hall with great interest. When she saw Leng Haoyu leisurely sitting on the side drinking tea, she didn't forget to glare at him with dissatisfaction. "I came to say goodbye to Li Li. Why do you have to be so thick-skinned and follow me?" Leng Haoyu smiled with good temper. "Ting Princess Consort Ding and I have met once. You came to say goodbye, can't I come to say goodbye?" Mu Rongting said with some irritation. "Leng Haoyu, I'm going because my father is going to Yongju. Why are you, a young master, running around? Be careful that you don't die of exhaustion on the way." Leng Haoyu blinked and looked at her with a touched face. "Ting are you worried about me?" "Don't worry, for Ting no matter how difficult the journey is, I will definitely persevere." Chapter 148. Leng Haoyu. Go to hell. Mu Rongting had been pestered by Leng Haoyu for so many years, but she found that she had always underestimated how thick-skinned this guy was. She was so angry that her pretty face turned red and she couldn't help but stomp her feet. Leng Haoyu looked at his angry fiancé in a good mood and drank tea with a smile. There was a trace of helplessness in his half-closed eyes. In Ting eyes, he would always be a hedonistic son who only knew how to eat, drink, and play. He would never be as promising and capable as his elder brother. Only when he saw Ting angry at him did he feel that he was still different from others in her eyes. Cough cough. "Murong, who made you so angry?" Yi Li slowly stepped into the parlor and looked at the angry Mu Rongting with a smile. Only then did Mu Rongting remember that this was not her home, nor was it somewhere outside. It was the Ding King's mansion that many influential people in the capital were cautious of. She couldn't help but be shocked. She glared at Leng Haoyu and said angrily, "Who else could it be other than this guy? You made me so rude." Leng Haoyu stood up and bowed. "Greetings, Princess." Yi Li smiled and said, "Young Master Leng, you don't have to be so polite. Please sit down." She pulled Mu Rongting to the side and sat down. She raised her hand and pinched Mu Rongting's angry little face and said with a smile, "Mu Rong, did you come to the Ding King's mansion at this time to say goodbye to me?" Mu Rongting looked at her in surprise and said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to be so well informed even though you didn't leave the house. I only got the news yesterday afternoon. But time is too tight. Father has to leave early tomorrow morning, so I can only take advantage of the time today to say goodbye to you." Mu Rong also wants to accompany General Mu Rong to Yongju? Mu Rongting said proudly, "Of course. My father is going to the border alone. How can I not follow him to take care of him?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said, "General Mu Rong also agreed to let you go." Mu Rongting wasn't young anymore. She had to get married in 2 years at the latest. General Mu Rong might not come back for 3 to 5 years if he was stationed at the border. Mu Rongting glanced at Leng Haoyu who was sitting at the side. She pulled the braid on her chest and whispered, Father has already agreed. Originally, his father did not agree, but Lung Haoyu said something to his father that made him change his mind. Murong-ting thought with some jealousy. She really didn't know if she was her father's biological daughter or if Lung Haoyu, that bastard, was his biological son. His father actually changed his mind after listening to him. She had been begging for the entire night. Sensing Murong-ting's dissatisfaction, Lung Haoyu touched his nose helplessly and said, "Princess, actually, I'm also here to say goodbye. I will also be heading south soon." Yi Li raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Oh, young Master Lung is also going to Yongju?" "No, I'm going to Lingju." Lung Haoyu smiled and said, "I have some business matters to deal with in Lingju. Perhaps I'll make a trip to Nanjiao. I heard that eldest young Master Shu is traveling in Nanjiao. If we are fortunate enough to meet, does Wang Fei have any words for young Master Shu?" Murong-ting looked at him disdainfully and snorted, "You're doing business? All these years, other than using the Lung family's money to fool around, when have you ever done any business? Uncle Lung actually agreed to let you go out?" Lung Haoyu pulled out an unruly smile. "Ting is right. My father thinks that I'm too useless, so he decided to kick me out and rely on myself." "Ah." Murong-ting didn't expect Lung Haoyu to be kicked out of the family. She used to think that Lung Haoyu would probably be raised by Uncle Lung and Brother Lung for the rest of his life. Although she hated Lung Haoyu's naughtiness, she couldn't bear to think of him going to Lingju alone in the future. "That, if you can't live anymore, you can come to Shattered Snow Pass. My father should also need a lot of people. I knew that Ting still cares about me." Lung Haoyu held his chest and acted as if he was intoxicated. Murong-ting was so angry that she couldn't hold back and threw a dart straight at Lung Haoyu's face. Lung Haoyu tilted his head slightly and casually waved the folding fan in his hand to the side. The dart fell into the flower pot next to him. Yi Li covered her mouth and chuckled. She pulled Murong-ting and said, "All right, Murong, I do have a letter to ask young Master Leng to bring to eldest brother. Second young Master Leng, I wonder if you can go to the study for a chat." Lung Haoyu stood up and said, "It's my pleasure. Princess, please." Yi Li apologized to Murong-ting and called Qing Shuang and the others to accompany Murong-ting before inviting Lung Haoyu to the study. Murong-ting was stunned as she watched Lung Haoyu's departing figure. This guy didn't seem so annoying when he was serious. "Young Master Leng, please take a seat." In the study, Lung Haoyu's smile that belonged to a hedonistic son gradually disappeared, and there was a sharpness between his eyebrows. He looked like a different person, and was definitely not as harmless as before. "Since you know what kind of person Murong-ting likes, why do you have to make her hate you?" Sitting behind the desk, Yi Li asked curiously. Lung Haoyu raised his eyebrows and smiled. There was a hint of bitterness in his smile as he said, "If it wasn't for a coincidence, the original Lung Haoyu would be like what the world sees today. Every family had its own difficulties, and the Lung family was certainly not a clean and flawless place." Yi Li didn't ask more about Lung Haoyu's private affairs. She just said, "Murong-ting is lively and competitive. She is destined to like someone who is stronger than her. I wish you good luck." "Thank you, Princess." Lung Haoyu smiled. Looking at the young man in front of her, Yi Li sighed softly in her heart. The world only saw how the emperor valued the eldest young master of the Lung family, Leng Qingyu, who was proficient in both civil and military matters, but no one knew that this young man, who seemed to be reluctant to leave brothels and taverns every day and fooled around with his friends, actually held nearly half of the assets of the Ding imperial estate. The money flowing through his hands every day was enough to make any noble family's heart beat faster. Yi Li slowly ground the ink, picked up the brush, and wrote a few words. After drying it, she folded it and directly handed it to Lung Haoyu without even giving him an envelope. "If you meet eldest brother, you can give this to him. It doesn't matter if you don't meet him. Just deal with it casually." Lung Haoyu took a look and was sure that he didn't understand what was written on it. He didn't care and raised his eyebrows as he put the note into the secret pocket. He asked, "Does the prince and princess have any other instructions?" Yi Li smiled and said, "The prince has always been at ease with young Master Lung's work, so I have nothing else to instruct. However, I'm afraid that we have underestimated Mo Jingli before. Young Master Lung should be careful this time. Of course, there is also the safety of General Murong. Presumably, the prince agreed to let young Master Lung go because of this consideration. Lung Haoyu said apologetically, "Did the prince agree?" Yi Li looked at him and raised her eyebrows. "Otherwise, why do you think I want to talk to you alone?" Lung Haoyu's eyebrows flashed with joy. He had insisted on going to the south. Although the prince didn't fly into a rage, he still went against the prince's wishes. This made him feel guilty and uneasy. Yi Li looked at him and said, "The prince isn't feeling well and has already rested. Since he didn't stop you, he naturally agreed to your plan. It's just that the situation in the south will be tense in the future. You are different from Feng Jiao and the others. It's really risky to go to the south at this time." Feng Jiao also looked like a dissolute young master, but like Mo Xiaoyao, he had fought his way out of the battlefield when he was a teenager. The situation was also carried out in secret. Lung Haoyu had a large amount of wealth in his hands. It was really easy to attract attention. Once Mo Jingli or the emperor noticed his abnormality, it would be a fatal disaster. Chapter 149. Hearing Yi Li's words, Lung Haoyu's heart calmed down. "Princess, please rest assured. Haoyu won't ruin Prince's plans. A few years ago, I had the idea of doing some small business in Nanjiang. This chaos in Nanjiang is a good opportunity. It's good that Master Lung understands. Tomorrow, General Murong will set off." "Master Lung is?" Lung Haoyu shook his head. "I'll set off in 5 days. I'll go south by water." Yi Li saw that Lung Haoyu was thoughtful and didn't say anything else. She only said a few words and invited Lung Haoyu to go back to the flower pavilion to see Murong Ting. Standing in front of the majestic palace, Yi Li sighed in her heart. This was her 3rd time entering the palace. Due to the unpleasant experience of the previous 2 times, being summoned by the emperor to the palace this time made her more vigilant and careful. She, as the princess consort of Ding, was a woman. Under normal circumstances, even if the emperor wanted to see her, he should summon her in the name of the empress or Yi Jiaoyi. "Princess Ding, the emperor is inside. Please go in," the eunuch leading the way said in a low and flattering voice. Yi Li glanced at him. She still had a slight impression of him. He was the eunuch who came to the Yi residence to deliver the marriage edict. Yi Li nodded. Qing Luan and Qing Yu were left outside. The shadow guard naturally couldn't move freely in the palace. Yi Li could only walk alone into the magnificent palace that symbolized power and wealth. Princess Consort Yi of Ding greets the emperor. Long live the emperor. The spacious palace seemed cold and empty because of the lack of people. Mo Jingqi sat high up in the hall, looking down at the woman who was curtsying in the hall. After a while, he said, "Princess Consort Ding, you may rise." Yi Li stood up. "Thank you, Emperor." Mo Jingqi pointed to a chair, indicating for Yi Li to sit down. He asked with a smile, "Since the beginning of winter, Prince Ding's health has been poor. I wonder if he's better now." Yi Li lowered her eyes and said softly, "Thank you for your concern, Emperor. The weather is getting warmer. Prince's health is still poor, but it's much better than during the winter." Mo Jingqi's eyes narrowed, carefully examining the woman's expression. She was calm and peaceful as an ordinary young woman. But this kind of calmness appeared in front of the emperor. It wasn't so ordinary. Moreover, according to the news that he had received, Prince Ding was rather concerned about this princess. How could a person without any instincts make Prince Ding care? It seemed, he had made a mistake back then. Even that arrogant brother of his had suffered a few losses in her hands. Every time he mentioned Yi Li in front of Mo Jingli, the other party's face was as black as ink. Mo Jingqi began to wonder if marrying such a woman to Mo Xiaoyao was an insult or a help. But it didn't matter, he would solve these problems very soon. "You have to manage the king's manor and take care of Prince Ding. Princess Consort, you've worked hard." Mo Jingqi smiled. "Emperor is too kind. These are all things Yi Li should do." Yi Li calmly replied. The two exchanged pleasantries for a long time. Mo Jingqi looked at the calm woman below and his heart grew increasingly irritated. It seemed that ever since Prince Ding's marriage was arranged, everything began to go wrong. Originally, Mo Jingli was only making small moves in the dark. But now, the Empress Dowager's actions were getting bigger and bigger. He was almost directly confronting Mo Jingli in the open. Because of the Empress Dowager and Prince Li, there were some people in the imperial court who were worried. Previously, his confidant Guan Zhong, who was sent to guard Shattered Snow Pass, had his leg kicked by a horse for no reason. As a result, Shattered Snow Pass had to be replaced. He sent his confidant to Shattered Snow Pass partly to guard against Mo Jingli and partly to guard against Nanzhao. Although Murong Shen was a capable fighter, he was not as trustworthy as Guan Ziyi. Shattered Snow Pass was such an important place. It made Mo Jingqi very uneasy to hand it over to someone who was not his confidant. But, after thinking about it, Mo Jingqi had to admit that there were not many capable people among his confidants. At least, he really could not find a trustworthy candidate to replace Murongshan. Thinking of the news he just received, that Mo Jingli dared to secretly collude with the Saint of Nanjiang, Mo Jingqi's chest burned with anger. But he could only endure it. Mo Jingli was his brother, and he had no evidence to prove that Mo Jingli was related to the Saint of Nanjiang. No matter if it was the Empress Dowager or the ministers related to Mo Jingli in the imperial court, they would not agree with him punishing Prince Li. He was the emperor, but many times, he found that he was not as arrogant as he once thought. Many times, even a simple decision would be hindered by all sides. Princess Ding, when I arranged for you to be married to Prince Ding, did you have any resentment in your heart? After a moment of silence, Mo Jingqi stared at Yi Li and asked abruptly. Yi Li was stunned. She quickly thought about what Mo Jingqi meant, but on the surface, she said calmly, Your Majesty's arrangement of marriage is a grace to Yi Li. How could I have any resentment? Oh. Mo Jingqi lowered his head to look at her with interest, smiling as he said, You were originally the princess consort that was personally arranged by the late emperor. My royal brother is talented in both literature and martial arts, and can be considered one of the most outstanding talents in the capital. But because of an imperial edict, you changed from Princess Consort Li to the pitiful Princess Ding. Do you really not have any resentment in your heart? Yi Li's eyes flashed, smiling faintly as she said, Prince Li broke off the engagement first, and then the emperor arranged the marriage. The emperor's arranged marriage happened to resolve Yi Li's predicament. How could Yi Li have any resentment? You don't hate me, then, you hate Prince Li? That's right, from what I know, my royal brother has suffered at the hands of Princess Ding more than once. Yi Li's heart jumped, smiling faintly as she said, Your Majesty must be joking. How could Yi Li dare to make Prince Li suffer? I wonder, what instructions does Your Majesty have for specially summoning Yi Li today? If this continued, she probably would not be able to leave the palace until noon. It was not a good thing for a woman with a title to spend too much time with the emperor without the company of a concubine. Mo Jingqi looked at her and smiled, saying, Very good, we like smart people. Since that's the case, we won't beat around the bush with Princess Consort. Princess Ding, does Prince Ding know about the matter of Mo Jingli colluding with the Saint of Nanjiang? Yi Li lowered her eyes, respectfully saying, Replying to Your Majesty, Yi Li is slow-witted. Yi Li does not understand the matter of Prince Li and the Saint of Nanjiang. You don't understand? Mo Jingqi raised his brows, looking at Yi Li with a smile that was not a smile as he said, Prince Ding trusts Princess Consort very much. From what we know, when Prince Ding was seriously ill, Princess Consort Ding personally took care of many matters in the Ding Kingdom. Princess Consort is telling us that you don't know? Does Princess Consort know? What is the crime of deceiving the emperor? Yi Li's half-closed eyes flashed with a cold light. She lowered her head and looked at the ground, saying, Deceiving the emperor is a capital crime. However, if Your Majesty is certain that the Ding Kingdom knows about Prince Li's matter, why don't you directly ask the prince? Yi Li is only a woman. Even if she controls the Ding Kingdom, she will not interfere with the matters of the imperial court. Impudent! Mo Jingqi angrily shouted, glaring at Yi Li with a trace of viciousness and killing intent. If it was an ordinary woman with a title, Perhaps she would be frightened by this killing intent. However, to Yi Li, this bit of threat and intimidation was far from enough. Chapter 150. She stood up and bowed slightly. Yi Li has been impudent. Your Majesty, please forgive her. Mo Jingqi snorted, staring at Yi Li. The Ding Palace is well informed. We know better than you. Yi Li, Mo Xiaoyao can't protect you forever. You may not be clear about Jing Li's personality, but Mo Xiaoyao definitely knows. Why don't you go back and ask him if he's considering our problem? Yi Li smiled inwardly. Was the Emperor threatening her? Many thanks for your Majesty's reminder. Yi Li will consider it carefully, Yi Li said. Seeing that Yi Li was not tactful, the anger in Mo Jingqi's eyes deepened. However, he also knew that he could not do anything to Princess Ding in the palace. He only stared at Yi Li for a long time before snorting and ordering someone to bring Yi Li out. Your Majesty. Seeing Yi Li leave, Mo Jingqi's eyes flickered with unpredictability. An ordinary-looking young man walked out from the back of the palace, respectfully looking at Mo Jingqi. Mo Jingqi calmed down the anger in his chest, looking at the young man. Back then, it seems that I really made a mistake when I gave Yi Li to Mo Xiaoyao. What did Yi Wenhua do? This Yi Li is harder to deal with than his 4 daughters combined. With her, the Shu family will most likely support Mo Xiaoyao. The young man said in a low voice. The Shu family does not have much contact with the Ding Palace. Besides, it's not good to anger the Shu family now. The young man sighed inwardly. The emperor was good at everything, but he was too paranoid. While they were secretly fighting against King Li and the Empress Dowager, it was not good to make more enemies. If the emperor's suspicion pushed the Shu family to King Li or Prince Ding's side, then the losses would outweigh the gains. How could Mo Jingqi not understand the young man's advice? It was just that he could not fully control the situation that made him feel incomparably anxious. Waving his hand, Mo Jingqi furrowed his brows and asked, during the morning court session, the Hua nation's duke requested that the Da Chu state assist the Nanzhao royal family in quelling the chaos. What do you think? The young man pondered for a moment and nodded. Duke Hua is dedicated to the country. His suggestion is indeed beneficial to us. However, we don't have to rush to quell the rebellion for them. Let's just let the Nanzhao king and the saintess of the southern wilderness kill each other. As long as we give a certain amount of help when needed, Nanzhao king will remember the emperor's kindness. Mo Jingqi furrowed his brows and thought for a moment. You're right. Zhen wants to see what Zhen's good brother wants to do. Didn't he want to help the saintess of Nanjiang? Why should I help the Nanzhao royal family? I want to see who will win in the end. The young man frowned. Seeing Mo Jingqi's cold smile, he suppressed the worry in his heart. She hoped that the emperor would not invest too much energy in the southern border. Greetings to Princess Ding. Yi Jiaoyi invites you in. As soon as they came out of the hall, they ran into the eunuch in charge of Yi Yu Palace who had been waiting for them. Yi Li frowned slightly. In October, Yi Yu safely gave birth to a prince. This was the emperor's 6th prince. However, Yi Yu's position in the palace did not rise as expected. She was still Jiaoyi. At the same time, she became the only concubine who did not hold the position of concubine. This made Yi Yu's position, which had been like the sun at high noon in the first half of the year, immediately become awkward. Even though she had 2 younger sisters who were concubines, her lack of status in the palace made life difficult for her. Yi Li understood that this was Mo Jingqi's warning to the Yi family. After thinking for a while, Yi Li said, I'm not feeling well and want to go back to rest. Please forgive me, Yi Jiaoyi. Your Highness. The eunuch in charge did not expect Yi Li to refuse so bluntly. He said in a panic, Your Highness, Yi Jiaoyi asks you to see her for the sake of your sisterhood. Yi Li frowned. Since Mo Jingqi had his eyes on her, the Empress Dowager would not be far away. Going to see Yi Yu now was not good for her or Yi Yu. Last year, she said that if Yi Yu wanted to live peacefully in the palace, it was best not to get involved in those things. Now it seemed that Yi Yu was still involved. Well, since the Yi family had gotten involved, even if Yi Yu was in the palace, she could not avoid it. Fine, lead the way. Thank you, Your Highness. Hearing her consent, the eunuch in charge thanked her happily and hurriedly led the way to Yi Yu's Yaohua palace. Compared with the pregnant but radiant Yi Yu when Yi Li came to Yaohua palace for the first time, Yi Yu was obviously much dimmer now. Holding the little prince who was still in swaddling clothes, she sat on the soft couch. Her beautiful face was full of sadness and gloominess. Seeing Yi Li come in, she hurriedly wanted to get up, but Yi Li shook her head and said, "Second sister, you don't have to be so polite." Yi Yu dismissed the people around her and looked at Yi Li. Although Yi Li was indifferent, she was obviously more elegant and graceful than a few months ago. She smiled bitterly and said, "I thought third sister wouldn't come to see me." Yi Li lowered her eyes and said softly, "Second sister, you should know that it is not good to see you and the little prince now." Yi Yu was startled. She lowered her head to look at the child in her arms who did not understand anything and said with a bitter smile, "How could I not know? But, third sister has seen my current situation. Third sister, what do you think I can do?" Yi Li frowned and said, "Second sister, now that you have the little prince, there is no harm in taking care of the child. No matter how cruel the emperor is, he will not do anything to his own flesh and blood. Father's matters, second sister, don't get involved. As for other matters, even if Yi Yu wanted to, she did not have the ability. She could not help in the game between the emperor and Empress Dowager Li. Instead, she would be implicated because Minister Yi had a foot in both boats. If Mo Jingqi won in the end, she would have a prince to protect her and would not be killed. If Mo Jingli won, she, as a woman, would not have the power to reverse the situation. Yi Yu held the child and stared blankly at Yi Li. After a while, she said faintly, "Grandmother was wrong. Father was also wrong. I know Ying Er's character. She can't do anything right. No matter if Empress Dowager Li wins or loses, fourth sister will not bring any glory to the Yi family. As for the emperor, wait until the day the emperor can make arbitrary decisions. Father's actions today will only bring disaster to the Yi family. Is it because of father that the emperor has not promoted second sister's position?" Yi Li asked. "What else could it be?" Yi Yu smiled. Her smile contained a bit of sorrow. When she had first entered the palace, she had been spirited and ambitious. But gradually, she realized that the palace was not as beautiful as she had imagined. The emperor doted on concubine Liu the most. The one he respected the most was the empress who was born in a prestigious family. She boasted that she was talented and beautiful, but in the palace where beauties were gathered, she was nothing. Even the initial doting was only because of her father's loyalty. Once he realized that her father was not as loyal as he had imagined, the heartless emperor did not bother to leave her any face. The emperor was heartless. No matter if Yi Yu was willing or forced to walk this path, Yi Li could not give her too much sympathy. "Second sister, did you have someone call me here to discuss something?" Chapter 151. Yi Yu looked at her cold and calm expression and in the end, she still shook her head and said, "It was my wishful thinking. Even if I beg third sister to help us mother and son, third sister will not agree." Yi Li said, "I can't help second sister, right now. I'm afraid that no one can help each other. Since second sister knows about the matter between the emperor and Li Wang, then you should also know about the situation in the Prince Ding mansion. It's not better than second sister right now, right?" Yi Yu sighed and said, "In the past, I always boasted that I was smart, but now I know that third sister is the smart one among us sisters." Yi Li slightly frowned and said, "Since second sister is fine, I will go back first." Yi Yu quietly hugged the child and sat on the soft couch, looking at Yi Li with a faint apologetic expression. Yi Li suddenly became alert and suddenly stood up, but she only felt a wave of dizziness and her vision turned black as she fell to the ground. Yi Yu silently looked at Yi Li who had fallen to the ground and softly said, "I'm sorry third sister, I am the mother of a child. I have to make plans for my son." In the spring of the 12th year of Emperor Ping in Da-Chu State, Yaohua Palace caught fire. Zhao Yi Shi and the sixth prince died in the Sea of Fire. Ding Country's princess consort, Yi Li, who was visiting Yi Jiaoyi at Yaohua Palace at that time, disappeared. Prince. Not good. In the Ding King mansion, The usually calm and steady Chief Steward Mo rushed to the study in the side hall of the main courtyard with messy footsteps. Feng Jiao sat in a chair in the corner of the study with an expression of watching a good show and lazily said with a smile, "Ah Yao, to be able to scare Chief Steward Mo to this extent, it really is not good." Before he finished speaking, Chief Steward Mo had already reached the door of the study and said to Mo Xiaoyao with a pale face, Princess has gone missing in the palace." Feng Jiao was stunned and immediately jumped up and shouted, "How is this possible? Why would he suddenly disappear from the palace?" The two of them simultaneously turned to look at Mo Xiaoyao. Mo Xiaoyao seemed to be in a daze. When the two of them looked over, he slowly placed the book back on the table. He asked in a deep voice, "What's going on?" Chief Steward Mo said with a trembling voice, "After Wang Fei had an audience with His Majesty, Yi Jiaoyi of Yaohua Palace sent someone to invite Wang Fei over, saying that she had something to ask of you. By the time the Shadow Guard arrived, the entire Yaohua Palace was already on fire. Yi Jiaoyi and the sixth prince died in the fire, and the princess is missing." Mo Xiaoyao leaned against the wheelchair, closed his eyes and asked in a deep voice, "Where did Qing Luan and Qing Yu go?" "Qing Luan and Qing Yu are also missing. Qing Luan and Qing Yu didn't enter Yaohua Palace with the princess consort, but the palace's shadow guard couldn't find them." "Very good." Mo Xiaoyao's voice was low and deep. It didn't seem to carry any anger, but it made people feel as cold as ice. The whole study room seemed to be frozen with a layer of frost in an instant, cold to the bone. "The princess is missing, and the two girls are also missing. The palace's shadow guard didn't know anything." "Very good. I should praise the shadow guard for being loyal to their duty all these years, right? Prince, please calm down." Feng Jiao and Chief Steward Mo's complexion both changed, and they both knelt down to beg for forgiveness. Mo Xiaoyao didn't look at the two of them. He lightly waved his hand and said, "Go and prepare, I want to enter the palace immediately. Feng Jiao, secretly block all the exits out of the capital. I don't want to see any suspicious person leaving the capital." Feng Jiao stood up and said, "This subordinate obeys." Chief Steward Mo hesitated for a moment and said, "Prince, I'm afraid your body is not suitable for." Before he finished speaking, Mo Xiaoyao lightly glanced over. That sharp gaze made Chief Steward Mo's heart tremble, and the rest of his words were stuck in his throat. Feng Jiao quickly pulled Chief Steward Mo out. Chief Steward Mo worriedly frowned and said, "Prince's body can't be tormented now, this." He was also worried about the princess consort's disappearance, but if the prince also collapsed, then the Ding Wang Fu wouldn't need to be schemed against by others, and would be finished immediately. Feng Jiao shook his head and said, "You know Prince's temperament, it's useless to say anything now. Quickly invite Mr. Chen over. It's best if Mr. Chen can enter the palace with us." Chief Steward Mo also felt that Feng Jiao's words were reasonable. He could only sigh and quickly walk towards the guest courtyard where Chen Yang was temporarily staying. Feng Jiao turned his head and looked worriedly at the silent study. He could only sigh in his heart and hope that Yi Li was safe and sound. In the study, Mo Xiaoyao silently lowered his head and stared at his hands that were placed on the armrest. Because of the long period of illness, the back of his hands had become excessively pale. It was unknown when a thin layer of frost had formed. Mo Xiaoyao expressionlessly looked at it, as if he didn't notice the abnormality of his hands at all. Gradually, the frost began to turn into fine water droplets, and finally turned into a faint warm smoke that evaporated into the study and disappeared without a trace. A trace of dark red blood slowly fell from Mo Xiaoyao's lips. He lowered his head and glanced at the blood dripping on his light blue clothes. He slowly took out a snow-white handkerchief from his sleeve and slowly wiped the blood from his lips. "Mo Xiaoyao, you are courting death." At this time, the palace was already in chaos. Mo Jingqi's face was gloomy. He stared at everyone present, his eyes crazily flashing with suspicion and ferocity. He didn't care if Yi Yu and the newborn little prince were burned to death, but if there was a princess consort of Ding among them, then he couldn't help but care. Mo Jingqi never thought that someone would take advantage of a loophole in his palace. Yes, as soon as it happened, Mo Jingqi was alerted that this was not an ordinary accident. This was a conspiracy against him. The princess consort of Ding died in the palace, and she was summoned in by him. Mo Jingqi didn't dare to imagine how big of a storm it would cause if the Mohist army and the Black Cloud cavalry fought over this matter. Although he had sent his trusted subordinates to warn the guards of the capital at the first moment of the incident, his heart was still unsettled. His gaze fell on the Empress Dowager sitting on the side, and Mo Jingqi's gaze became more complicated. If Mo Jingqi was asked who he suspected, the first person he suspected was his Empress mother. Growing up by the Empress Dowager's side, he naturally understood his mother's character of doing anything to achieve her goals. And from the worship and admiration of the past to the unbearable present, Mo Jingqi didn't want to admit that he was still somewhat afraid of the Empress Dowager. Looking at Mo Jingli sitting on the side indifferently, the anger in Mo Jingqi's eyes gradually faded. He couldn't lose his composure now. There were more difficult people to deal with later. And he was the emperor. He couldn't shrink back. Prince Ding has arrived. The last time the people present saw Mo Xiaoyao was last June. At that time, other than being unable to walk, Mo Xiaoyao was no different from a normal person, and it made many people more or less worried. But a few months later, there was news that Prince Ding was seriously ill, and the Ding Palace closed its doors to visitors like in previous years. This made many people's worried hearts slowly relax. It was the beginning of spring, and the weather in Chu capital was still chilly. Mo Xiaoyao sat in a wheelchair and was pushed in by Jin. He was wearing a light green cloak with silver threads, and the collar revealed the white imperial robes embroidered with silver dragons. Even though half of his face was covered by the mask, it could still be seen that Mo Xiaoyao's complexion wasn't good. His unusually pale complexion showed that he was still ill. Chapter 152. Prince Ding, Mo Xiaoyao, greets the Emperor and Empress. Greets the Empress Dowager. Mo Xiaoyao sat in the wheelchair and said calmly. The hall was solemn. Mo Jingqi gathered his thoughts and said loudly, Prince Ding, you may rise. Mo Xiaoyao said, Thank you, Your Majesty. Forgive my rudeness, but may I ask where my wife is? Everyone in the hall looked at each other. Mo Jingqi glanced at the Empress Dowager and Mo Jingli, who were completely indifferent. His eyes darkened and he turned to look at the Empress. The Empress glanced at Prince Ding and sighed in her heart. She said, Prince Ding, Princess Ding was also in Yaohua Palace at that time. I'm afraid she has already. Prince Ding, please restrain your grief. Restrain my grief. Mo Xiaoyao calmly glanced at everyone in the hall and asked in a low voice, My princess consort was summoned to the palace for an audience. Now that she is missing, you tell me to restrain my grief. Yaohua Palace was on fire. Yi Jiaoyi, the sixth prince, and the servants of Yaohua Palace have all been found. Only Princess Consort Ding is missing. What Prince Ding said is right. Perhaps Prince Ding's imperial concubine has been spared. The Empress Dowager sat up and said seriously, but now, Princess Consort Ding is missing. The fire in Yaohua Palace is really strange. Yi Ying sat next to Mo Jingli, her eyes red from crying. She was indeed jealous of Yi Yu and hated Yi Li, but she did not expect that her two sisters would suddenly disappear. Yi Yu was really good to her when she was in her mother's home. In the past 6 months, her relationship with Yi Li had eased a lot. The life of Princess Consort in Prince Li's mansion made her understand many things that Madame Wang had never taught her. So she knew that Yi Yu and Yi Li's deaths were definitely not good for her. Empress Dowager, Your Majesty, how could my second sister's Yaohua Palace suddenly catch fire? How could it be so coincidental that my third sister was also inside? I beg the Empress Dowager and the Emperor to uphold justice for my 2 elder sisters. Mo Jingli glanced at Yi Li and snorted softly, if you want to blame someone, blame it on Yi Li's bad luck. She didn't stay in the prince's mansion for no reason and ran around everywhere. Didn't she die with Yi Jiaoyi and the 6th prince? Noble consort Liu was sitting beside Mo Jingli. Hearing Mo Jingli's words, she raised her head and asked coldly, King Li, do you mean that someone wants to hurt Yi Jiaoyi and the 6th prince, and Princess Ding was accidentally involved? Mo Jingli sneered. Isn't it natural? Who would have the guts and ability to set fire and kill people in the palace? And it happened to burn Yi Jiaoyi and the 6th prince to death. Who knew if Yi Li saw something and was silenced? Even if he hasn't been burned to death, he should still be in the palace. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and stared at Mo Jingli. Does King Li have any objections? Mo Jingli smiled and said, this younger brother doesn't have any objections. But since Princess Ding's body is missing, we have to give the officials and citizens an explanation. He couldn't say that Ding Wangfei had disappeared from the palace like this. If that's the case, who would dare to enter the palace in the future? The Empress frowned. Then what does King Li mean? Replying to Imperial sister-in-law, I think it's best to search the palace. If Princess Ding is still alive, she must still be in the palace. Perhaps we can even find the culprit who set the fire. There are so many of us sitting here, the culprit won't come to us, right? I think Prince Ding has the same idea as Mo Xiaoyao, don't you think so? Of course, Mo Jingqi didn't want to search his harem. But facing King Li's righteous suggestion and Prince Ding's indifferent agreement, he had to agree. It was almost certain that before tomorrow, this matter would become a joke and spread to every corner of Dhu state. Mo Jingqi's heart was filled with hatred. This King Li he had doted on since he was young would not let go of any chance to smear his reputation. Mo Xiaoyao didn't participate in the massive search. Instead, he used his body as an excuse to rest in the side hall. He knew in his heart that Mo Jingli's so-called search wouldn't yield any useful clues. It was very likely that they would find a bunch of messy things in Mo Jingqi's harem. If it was any other time, he wouldn't mind going to take a look. But right now, his mood was very bad. Forcing himself to calm down and speak with those people in the main hall was already his limit. Prince, your body. Shen Yang and Chief Steward Mo stood behind Mo Xiaoyao, one on the left and one on the right, asking worriedly. Mo Xiaoyao raised his hand to stop him. He shook his head and said, I'm fine. Tell Feng Zhiyao to give up the palace. Princess Li is not in the palace. Shen Yang raised his eyebrows and asked, Prince, are you so sure that Princess Ding is still alive? Since Princess Li went to visit Yi Jiaoyi, she should be with Yi Jiaoyi at that time. Even the bones of the sixth prince have been found, but Princess Li is missing. With Princess Li's skills, it's impossible that she couldn't escape from Yaohua Palace. Then, Mo Xiaoyao frowned and pondered. Yaohua Palace was completely burned down by the fire. Now it was impossible to find any clues. The Shadow Guard had arrived outside Yaohua Palace at the first moment of the fire, but he didn't see Princess Li come out. Moreover, the fire in Yaohua Palace burned too fast. Come, Prince. An ordinary-looking old eunuch appeared at an inconspicuous side door of the side hall, respectfully waiting for Mo Xiaoyao's order. Mo Xiaoyao said indifferently, go and see if there are any secret passages or secret rooms in Yaohua Palace. Also, find out who Princess Yi Jiaoyi was in contact with when she was alive. Finally, send someone who knows medicine to check the bodies of Princess Yi Jiaoyi and the sixth prince. The old eunuch didn't feel strange about Mo Xiaoyao's order. His wrinkled old face was still calm. He respectfully said, this subordinate will follow your order. I will not disappoint the prince. Mo Xiaoyao snorted and lightly said, I won't pursue this matter. If the rest of the things can't be done well, you don't have to come to see I again. Thank you, Prince. This subordinate will take his leave. Princess Li, I know you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Yi Li woke up in the darkness, only feeling a throbbing pain in her head. Yi Li couldn't help but smile bitterly. In the end, she was still careless. Even though she knew Mo Jingqi was afraid of the Ding family, she was still certain that he wouldn't dare to touch the Ding family's consort in the palace. But she didn't expect Yi Yu to do this to her. Yi Li didn't immediately open her eyes. She quietly laid on the bed for a while. After confirming that there was no one around her, she slowly opened her eyes. The situation seemed to be much better than what Yi Li had expected. At least, she was not imprisoned in a dark cell, but in a room that seemed to be well decorated. The room was decorated according to the style that the noble ladies in the capital liked. The furnishings in the room were elegant and luxurious. Even the windows were covered with the favorite misty gauze that the noble ladies liked. Yi Li sat up, leaning against the bedpost and smiling bitterly. Her body was soft. It seemed that Yi Yu had really poisoned her. It was no wonder that the other party dared to put her in such a defenseless room. There wasn't even a guard. They were sure that with her weak body, it would be difficult for her to even walk to the door. Chapter 153. With a creak, the door outside the screen was pushed open and a green-clothed girl came in with something. Seeing Yi Li sitting by the bed, she smiled in surprise and said, "Miss, you're finally okay." Yi Li looked at her and frowned slightly. "Where is this place? How long have I been sleeping?" The green-clothed girl put the thing in her hand on the table and said with a smile, "Miss has been sleeping here for more than 2 days. Miss must be hungry since you haven't eaten for 2 days. Xiaoyun has prepared some porridge. Do you want to eat some first?" Yi Li calmly looked at the girl who cleverly served a bowl of porridge with a faint fragrance to Yi Li. Yi Li raised her hand and raised her eyebrows. "How am I supposed to eat like this?" She could sit up now because she was leaning against the pillar at the head of the bed. Even raising her hand was very difficult. How was she supposed to eat while holding her bowl? The green-clothed girl smiled apologetically at Yi Li and said, "It's Xiaoyun who forgot." "Xiaoyun will feed Miss." Yi Li lowered her eyes and said softly, "Then I'll have to trouble Miss. Xiaoyun is just a servant." "Miss, you don't have to be so polite." The girl called Xiaoyun had a quiet smile. She sat by Yi Li's bed and carefully fed her the porridge. Yi Li was a little unhappy to be served as a seriously ill person, but she was not a person who would abuse herself. She had been hungry for 2 days and didn't eat because of her so-called pride. She was looking for trouble. As for this girl who claimed to be a servant, if she was just an ordinary servant, she was an idiot. After eating, Yi Li's strength still hadn't recovered. Xiaoyun called a servant to come in and clean up the dishes. She stayed in the room and walked around busily. Yi Li looked at her, who seemed to be busy but was actually not doing anything. She said lightly, "If you have nothing to do, you can find a place to sit down. I'm dizzy from all the shaking." Xiaoyun did not feel embarrassed at being exposed at all. She giggled and said, "Our young master is afraid that young lady will be bored alone and wants Xiaoyun to accompany young lady." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Your young master is considerate. Please thank him for me." Xiaoyun nodded and blinked her eyes playfully. "Young master will be very happy to hear you say that." Yi Li smiled and didn't say anything. She quietly leaned against the headboard and listened to Xiaoyun ramble on and on about other people's business. This girl named Xiaoyun was definitely well trained, and it was not easy to get anything out of her. Instead, it would make her more vigilant. Since she was still unable to move, Yi Li decided not to waste her time. After staying in the room for 2 days, Xiaoyun's hidden vigilance when she looked at Yi Li finally faded a little. After eating breakfast, Yi Li casually asked, "I want to go out for a walk, is that okay? I feel like I'm going to be stiff after lying down for 2 days." Xiaoyun hesitated for a moment before agreeing. She then called the 2 maidservants over to help Yi Li walk around the garden. After 2 days, Yi Li finally stepped out of the room. She couldn't help but take a deep breath of fresh air. Her depressed mood instantly improved. Yi Li let the 2 little maidservants support her as they walked in the small garden. She inadvertently looked around the courtyard. This courtyard was not large. Looking at the little buds that had just sprouted from the tree, Yi Li smiled faintly. "Help me sit in the garden for a while. Is your young master not here right now?" Yi Li pointed at the stone table and chair in front of her. The 2 servant girls had clearly been told beforehand. They obediently followed Yi Li's instructions and helped her sit at the stone table. However, they were not willing to answer her question. Yi Li did not care about this. She leaned against the table in a good mood and looked at the flowers and plants in the garden. It was just the beginning of spring and there were no beautiful scenes of flowers blooming. The north was colder than the south. Many flowers and plants had just sprouted. Yi Li seemed to be curiously looking at a cluster of inconspicuous yellow flowers blooming in the flowerbed closest to her. She bent down and was just about to reach out to pick it when a slightly cold hand grabbed her hand. Yi Li raised her head to look at Xiaoyun, who had suddenly appeared in front of her. She raised an eyebrow in confusion. Xiaoyun smiled and said, "Miss, this little flower looks pretty, but it is poisonous. So, it is best if you don't touch it." Yi Li frowned. She looked at the small flower buds and said, "I see that this is the only flower in the entire garden. Although it looks unremarkable, it looks delicate. I didn't expect it to be poisonous." Xiaoyun smiled with a bit of pride. Sometimes, the more unremarkable a flower is, the more poisonous it is. Compared to those beautiful flowers that make people wary, this unremarkable flower is a true treasure. Yi Li smiled and shook her head. What kind of treasure is a poisonous flower? If Miss Xiaoyun likes flowers, I have a few pots of top-quality orchids in my residence. They are blooming right now. I can give one to Xiaoyun. Xiaoyun's eyes flashed with a strange light. She smiled at Yi Li and said, "Xiaoyun has forgotten that Miss has a noble status. Naturally, you won't be interested in these unremarkable things. However, the flowers and plants in this courtyard are a bit dangerous. If Miss likes them, Xiaoyun will get people to change the flowers and plants in this courtyard to ones that Miss likes." Yi Li smiled and shook her head. "That won't be necessary. Exotic flowers and plants have their own unique beauty. Ordinary flowers and plants also have their own style. Moreover, I don't plan on staying here for long. So, I won't trouble you to take care of the garden." Xiaoyun smiled. "Young master told us to take good care of Miss. Just tell Xiaoyun what Miss likes. If young master finds out that Miss isn't living well, this servant won't be able to bear the consequences." Yi Li's beautiful eyes turned and said with a faint smile, "Although I haven't met your young master, I still have to thank him. Since it's like this, I originally planned to go see the peach blossoms with my husband this year. I'm afraid we can't go now. Can I trouble Miss to pick a few for me when the peach blossoms bloom?" Xiaoyun clearly didn't think that Yi Li's request would be so simple. She smiled and said, "Of course. Xiaoyun promises to let Miss see the earliest peach blossoms this year. What else does Miss need? Xiaoyun will get people to bring it back." Seeing Xiaoyun agree to her request, the smile on Yi Li's face became much more sincere. She smiled and said, "If it's possible, help me bring some cosmetics back. I want the best cosmetics in the capital. I want jasmine-scented ones." "Jasmine?" Xiaoyun was startled. Yi Li smiled apologetically. "This is more ordinary, but I like the smell. I'll have to trouble Miss Xiaoyun." Xiaoyun shook her head and said, "No, Xiaoyun will definitely help Miss achieve what you want." Yi Li smiled and said, "Then I'll have to trouble Miss." Watching Xiaoyun leave, Yi Li leisurely leaned against the stone table and breathed in the fresh air. Her smiling gaze faintly fell on the flowers and plants in the flowerbed that was still a bit depressed. The smile in her eyes became even more joyful. Ding King Fu's study Mo Xiaoyao looked indifferently at the files in front of him. He raised his head and asked Feng Jiao, who was standing at the side, "What news is there from the palace?" Chapter 154. Feng Jiao said seriously, "The people in the palace have already explored Yaohua Palace. Yaohua Palace was built by the late emperor, and there are no secret passages. But the lotus pond in Yaohua Palace was not artificially dug, and it is the same as the river in the palace. The shadow guard suspects that the princess was taken from the water. And it should have been before the fire. And the bodies of Yi Jiaoyi and sixth prince, although they have been burned beyond recognition. But the shadow guard who secretly checked was sure that the female body was not Yi Jiaoyi. As for sixth prince, if Yi Jiaoyi is a fake, then sixth prince is most likely still alive." Mo Xiaoyao sneered, "Very well, 2 people in the palace are dead, and 5 people including Yi Jiaoyi and sixth prince are missing. However, the secret guards of my Ding Palace do not know anything." Feng Jiao sighed helplessly in his heart. Since the princess disappeared, the prince's breath became more and more frightening. Just a few words, without any anger, but the people who heard it couldn't help but feel cold all over. No wonder the others didn't want to come in and pushed him in to die. What's the movement of those people in the capital? Mo Jingqi is secretly sending people to look around. He doesn't know the whereabouts of the princess. Mo Jingli didn't do anything. After leaving the palace that day, he went straight back home. These days, he did what he should do as usual. Other people didn't do anything, and no suspicious people came in or out of the capital recently. Yi Li seemed to disappear out of thin air. Feng Zhiao was also helpless. No one thought that someone would dare to set fire to the palace and kidnap the princess. It happened so suddenly that when they wanted to find clues, all the useful clues had disappeared. If Yi Yu is not dead, she must still be in the palace. I want to see her in 3 days. It may not be difficult to hide an adult in the palace, but it's not so easy to hide a baby who doesn't know anything. Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice. Understood. Feng Zhiao respectfully accepted the order. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "There's one more thing. Princess's Shadow Guard, Shadow 1, Shadow 2, Shadow 3, and Shadow 4, have all disappeared." Mo Xiaoyao was stunned. Missing? Feng Zhiao nodded and said, "These 2 days, after Princess Consort disappeared, they went to the Shadow Guard commander for punishment. Because Princess Consort hasn't been found yet, they suppressed it first. But this morning, we discovered that all 4 of them had gone missing." Mo Xiaoyao lowered his eyebrows in thought for a moment before saying, "Don't worry about them for now." Yes. In a secret courtyard on the outskirts of Chu capital Li was bored to death as she sat by the flowerbed, staring blankly at the peach tree she had just planted. The 2 maidservants who accompanied her every day, who were suspected to be mutes, stood at a distance, waiting for her orders. Reaching out to poke at the flower buds on the peach tree, Yi Li twisted her lips and played with the flowers and grass beside her. She had lived in this place for 5 days already. As Xiaoyun had said, everything was taken care of very well except for Xiaoyun, who persistently put drugs in her food. However, if she insisted on putting drugs in every meal, it meant that the effects would not last long. Xiaoyun, who was skilled in medicine, clearly did not know that there was a kind of person who had astounding resistance to drugs. Maybe she knew, but she did not think that Yi Li was one of them. Yi Li's present body was not as good as before when she had undergone specialized anti-poison training, but since she knew from a young age that she was going to enter the Wang Fu in the future, she had done some targeted training and conditioning. Xiaoyun and the master behind her clearly did not have any intentions of truly harming her, so the drugs she put in were not harmful to the body. This meant that the effects of the drugs would not last long, but it was enough to deal with normal people. Now, every time Xiaoyun put in the drugs, she would be able to move freely for at least an hour. However, Yi Li was not in a hurry to escape. Even if she usually only saw Xiaoyun and a few servant girls who were not willing to speak, she could still keenly feel that there were many people watching her in the dark. With her body that had just recovered from the effects of the drugs, it would be difficult for her to escape. "Miss, I heard that you did not eat anything today. Is it because the servants did not make it to Mrs. liking?" Xiaoyun appeared in the garden and looked at Yi Li, who was pulling out the grass. Her eyes twitched. "Miss, that." Yi Li looked up and waved the grass in her hand. "You mean this? It will affect the peach tree's growth if it grows here, so I'm pulling it out. I have nothing to do anyway. Miss Xiaoyun, is there something you need?" Xiaoyun looked with heartache at the grass that Yi Li had thrown to the ground and forced a smile. "Miss, if you don't like it, I'll have someone clean it up." "How can I let Miss do it yourself?" Xiaoyun also had someone make some snacks. "Does Miss want to eat some?" Yi Li shook her head and sighed. "It's really boring here. With nothing to do all day, how can I eat anything? Can you tell your young master that I've disturbed him for so long, it's time for me to leave?" Xiaoyun smiled without any change in expression. Young master is not in the manner now. Even if Xiaoyun has the guts, she wouldn't dare to neglect young master's guests. "So, if Miss wants to leave, you'll have to wait for young master to come back." "I know." Yi Li said calmly, "I don't have much of an appetite these 2 days, so I won't eat the snacks. Miss Xiaoyun, you can go do what you need to do." Xiaoyun looked at Yi Li for a while, as if she was evaluating the truth in her words. In the end, she nodded and said, "Since that's the case, I'll have someone send it over when Miss is hungry. When young master comes back, this servant will immediately invite young master to see Miss." Bowing, Xiaoyun turned and left. Yi Li looked at her back as she left. A cold glint flashed in her eyes, and she picked up the weeds even faster. Just as Yi Li was about to pluck out half of the grass in the flowerbed, Xiaoyun finally came to invite Yi Li to meet her master with a face that could no longer smile. Yi Li threw away the grass in her hands and patted the dust off her hands. She then left with Xiaoyun with the help of the two maidservants. Yi Li was helped into an empty room not far from her room. The moment she entered, she saw a tall figure sitting behind a translucent screen. The two maidservants helped her to a chair and respectfully left. Xiaoyun threw a resentful look at Yi Li and also left. When she left, she didn't forget to close the door. Yi Li couldn't help but laugh. She guessed that Xiaoyun wouldn't be able to tolerate her for long. After all, if she gave her 2 more days, she would be able to pluck all the precious weeds in her yard. What's so funny? A man's deep voice came from behind the screen. Yi Li leaned against the chair and smiled at the faintly discernible figure. I want to laugh because I'm in a good mood. Good mood? Aren't you worried at all? Don't you want to know why you're here? Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? Yi Li lazily said, if you wanted to kill me, you would have done it already. Why waste our time? As for why I'm here. Speaking of which, to be able to bring me out of the palace without anyone knowing, it seems like your skills aren't small. The man seemed to be in a good mood as he gave a low laugh. What's the big deal about bringing you out of the palace? It's already been 7 days and you're at the foot of the capital, but whether it's your trash husband or that high and mighty person in the palace, they couldn't even find a corner of your clothes. Yi Li shrugged and said, all right, then it seems like you do have some skills. Also, you were able to get Yi Yu to help you plot against me. This time, I didn't fall for nothing. Chapter 155. The man snorted and said, the women of the Yi family, no matter if they look smart or stupid, they all like to think they are infallible. It doesn't take much effort to get her to help. Yi Li, have you guessed when the king's palace will announce your death? Unless they see my corpse, the king's palace will not announce my death. Yi Li said. A woman who thinks she is infallible. Do you think Mo Xiaoyao values you that much? The man's voice was filled with anger. Yi Li was not angry, but her laughter had a bit of ridicule. Whether Mo Xiaoyao values me or not, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with your distinguished self. Do you really not plan on coming out to meet me, or are you disfigured? Mo Jingli. The person behind the screen seemed to be stunned for a moment. The room was silent for a while, and then there was a burst of unbridled laughter. The person behind the screen sat up and laughed loudly. Yi Li, I really did underestimate you. The man who walked out from behind the screen was tall and straight. His handsome face gave people a cold feeling even when he was smiling. Who else could it be but Mo Jingli? Yi Li sat up and looked at Mo Jingli indifferently. Don't most people in the capital look down on Prince? Mo Jingli sneered and said, you're not surprised at all. It seems like you're not part of that majority. Yi Li helplessly frowned and looked at Mo Jingli. Clearly I'm part of that majority. Otherwise, I would not have provoked Prince. Most likely, I wouldn't be in this situation now. Mo Jingli snorted and moved in front of Yi Li. He looked down at her and asked, do you regret it? I already told you that going against I will not have a good ending. Mo Xiaoyao can't save you. Did Prince give me a choice? Yi Li raised her eyebrows. In Prince's mind, it's perfectly justifiable for you to break off the engagement and ruin my reputation. But I'm slapping Prince in the face by finding a better partner for myself. Your Highness King Li. Who do you think you are? Mo Jingli flicked his sleeves and retreated. He stared at Yi Li with a sinister and domineering gaze. Yi Li, you've always been good at making I angry. Yi Li sighed and raised her soft hand. Prince has been acting mysterious for so long. Now you should tell me why you've brought me here, right? When did you find out about I's identity? Mo Jingli asked instead of answering. Yi Li smiled. There aren't many people in the capital who have enmity with me. There are even fewer people who have enmity with me and have the guts to kidnap people in the imperial palace. And the only person who is willing to take this risk and still able to succeed, I think it's only His Highness. Mo Jingli was clearly not as irritable as he usually was. Hearing Yi Li's words, he walked to the side and sat down. He looked at Yi Li leisurely. Why do you think I is willing to take this risk? Yi Li indifferently said, something happened to Ding Wangfei in the imperial palace. No matter if it was done by the emperor or not, it's still the emperor's responsibility. Even if Ding Wangfu doesn't find trouble with the emperor, I'm afraid that the officials in the imperial court and the people's evaluation of the emperor will be very different. Isn't that right? Mo Jingli was in a good mood. He raised his eyebrows. That's right. Emperor Gige has lost all his face this time. You think I don't know that Mo Xiaoyao wants I to fight with Emperor Gige so that he can reap the benefits? I want him to take action first. Ding Wangfei has gone missing in the imperial palace. I don't believe that he can still sit still. You see, these few days, he has caused quite a bit of trouble for my Emperor Gige. Prince is very pleased with himself. Don't tell me I shouldn't be pleased. Mo Jingli smiled at Yi Li. Mo Xiaoyao thinks I will be the fool who was fooled by him when we were young. So what if he knows that Emperor Gige didn't do it? Even if it's for Prince Ding's reputation and face, he still has to find trouble with Emperor Gige for I. Yi Li raised her eyebrows. What if he knows that Prince Gige is the one who did it? Do you think I will give him this chance? I feel like he's already suspecting you, Yi Li silently said in her heart. You don't seem to be curious at all about what I plan to do with you. Mo Jingli looked at Yi Li with a frown. Yi Li looked up at him. Using me to threaten Mo Xiaoyao? I feel like I don't seem that important. Mo Jingli looked at her and nodded. To be honest, I also have some doubts about your value in Mo Xiaoyao's heart. So, for the time being, I don't plan on using you to make a deal with Mo Xiaoyao. Also, I suddenly thought of a more interesting method. I'm all ears. Yi Li looked at him with indifference. Yi Li's indifference did not affect Mo Jingli's high spirits. His satisfied gaze circled around Yi Li's body. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and said, "Last time at Beauty's Lake, I still remember it clearly. Actually, I was just joking at the time, but now, I suddenly feel like this is a pretty good idea. If one day the entire world knows that Mo Xiaoyao's princess is Ai's woman, what do you think will happen?" As if he thought of a beautiful future, Mo Jingli smiled proudly. At that time, you idiot will be killed by Mo Xiaoyao. Yi Li did not doubt that Mo Xiaoyao had the ability to use the blood of his enemies to wash away the humiliation he had suffered. If a person in Mo Xiaoyao's condition could persist and not be knocked down after experiencing such a hopeless situation, then he would definitely be able to do whatever he wanted to do. This kind of person was also the most terrifying enemy. Yi Li, don't you think this is a good idea? Mo Jingli looked at Yi Li with a smile in his eyes, as if he was looking at a caged kitten. Speaking of which, I do regret giving you to Mo Xiaoyao, but this is all your fault. If you didn't pretend to be mediocre to deceive I wouldn't have given you up to marry Yi Ying, that idiot who doesn't know anything. Isn't this the best situation? Everything will be the same as before, you will still belong to I. As he spoke in a low voice, Mo Jingli's body slowly leaned towards Yi Li. His tall body made Yi Li seem even more weak and powerless. Prince, I don't recommend you do this. Yi Li said softly, her voice clear and pleasant. Mo Jingli laughed in a low voice, I don't need your advice, you just have to be obedient. Yi Li, although you've always made I unhappy, I am magnanimous and won't blame you. Yi Li's smile was slightly cold. She raised her hand and slowly placed it on Mo Jingli's shoulder. Her lips curled into a faint smile, and her breath smelled like orchids. Is that so? Then, I think Prince won't blame me if I continue like this. The slightly cold hand landed on Mo Jingli's neck. It looked like Yi Li was sitting in a chair and reaching out to hug Mo Jingli's neck. However, this scene that was supposed to be tender and sweet was strangely murderous. Mo Jingli clearly felt that there was a sharp object dangerously pressed against his neck, and it could be cut with just a little bit of force. Yi Li smiled, I advise Prince not to act rashly. I just spent a lot of time in the garden plucking flowers and plants. If I accidentally cut Prince's noble neck, I wonder if Miss Xiaoyun will come to cure the prince's poison. Chapter 156. Yi Li. Mo Jingli roared through gritted teeth. Yi Li raised an eyebrow at him and waved her free hand in front of him. Her nails that were beautifully maintained were long and hard, with a faint balsamine flower juice on them. But there was a faint ominous blue at the edges. Yi Li, if you hurt I, you won't be able to escape. Mo Jingli suppressed the anger in his heart and calmly said. Yi Li gave a helpless sigh, You say it like Prince will let me go if I hurt you. Yi Li, let go of I now and I won't argue with you. Mo Jingli warned in a deep voice. The slender fingers on her neck pressed down slightly, successfully shutting Mo Jingli up. Yi Li said with a frown, Prince, I'm really tired of you being so full of yourself. I hope this is the last time we meet. Don't even think about it. Mo Jingli said with a cold smile. Don't be stupid. If it was someone else, they might be able to make a bet with me to see who's faster. But I don't think you'll make a bet with me because you never wanted to die. You still want to live to achieve your ambitions, right? Yi Li said with a smile. Mo Jingli took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in his heart. What do you want? Nothing. Yi Li gave a faint smile. Her empty hand snapped, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4. This subordinate greets the princess. The door was pushed open and a figure quickly flashed in before closing the door. Another figure silently floated down from the roof. One on the left and one on the right, they surrounded Mo Jingli from behind, and 1, and 3 greets the princess. Yi Li nodded in satisfaction. Where are the other 2? And 3 said, A2 and A4 are outside. When did you find me? Yi Li asked. Yesterday afternoon. And Yi lightly coughed and asked, Wang Fei, shouldn't you let go of Li Wang first? And San raised his head to look at the roof. He didn't see Wang Fei and Li Wang leaning against each other intimately. Yi Li raised an eyebrow. Prince. Mo Jingli snorted coldly and said, let go. Yi Li let go of her hands indifferently. With 2 swords pointed at her back, she believed that if Mo Jingli wasn't crazy, he would know what to do. As soon as Yi Li's fingers left his neck, Mo Jingli immediately got up and retreated to face Dark 1 and Dark 3. How did you guys get in? I walked in. Third Secret righteously replied. Mo Jingli narrowed his eyes and began to re-evaluate the strength of the 2 shadow guards in front of him. He more or less knew a little about the secret guards in the Ding King's residence, and they were indeed very powerful people. However, he had set up many layers of guards in this courtyard, and with just 4 people, they were able to sneak into the courtyard without making a sound. Wang Fei, now is. And Yi glanced at his unreliable brother and went forward to ask for instructions. Yi Li stood up and stretched her body, informed Dark 2 and Dark 4 to leave. That's right, I'll have to trouble Prince to send us off. Xiao Yun's medicine has no effect on you? Mo Jingli stared at her. Yi Li shook her head, it's effective, but the time limit has passed. She wouldn't tell him that she had also used the weeds in the garden to make an antidote. Although it wasn't completely effective, the so-called muscle softening powder wasn't too bad. Just now, Yi Li smiled and looked at Mo Jingli in a happy mood. If you acted rashly, I planned to remove your hands. As for this, you don't have to worry, there's no poison in my hands. Don't tell me I'm not worried that I'll accidentally cut my skin. Mo Jingli was silent for a while before he finally gritted his teeth. This time I lost. Actually, Prince doesn't need to be too calculative, I didn't win either. Now, Prince, please? Humph. When An Yi and An San led Mo Jingli out of the room, Miss Xiao Yun also rushed out of the room at the same time. A pair of pretty eyes stared at Yi Li, who was following behind her, almost bursting into flames. Let go of Gongzi. Behind her, An and An Sai quietly jumped down from the wall. Greetings to Wang Fei. Yi Li waved her hand to indicate that there was no need for formalities. She smiled at Miss Xiao Yun. Miss Xiao Yun, I'm indebted to you for taking care of me these past few days. Xiao Yun stared at her and gritted her teeth. What do you want to do? Let go of the prince and this miss will spare your lives. Yi Li hid behind Mo Jingli and pretended to be afraid. Ayo, Miss Xiao Yun, don't scare me, I's consort is very timid. So, Miss Xiao Yun, it's best if you put away your dangerous little things. If I's consort isn't careful. Yi Li raised her hand and her sharp fingernails drew a line of blood on Mo Jingli's neck. She blinked innocently at Xiao Yun. Here, like this. If I accidentally poke a hole in Prince's neck, can Miss Xiao Yun repair it? You. Xiao Yun saw Yi Li smiling as she rubbed the blood on her finger on Mo Jingli's clothes. Her face turned red with anger. But she quickly calmed down and gave a pure and pleasant smile to Yi Li. Miss, Prince invited you here out of kindness. You can leave if you want, but you're holding Prince hostage. Is this the etiquette of a guest? Yi Li smiled and said, I didn't think that not only is Miss Xiao Yun cute, you're also familiar with the etiquette of the Central Plains. But putting tendon softening powder in a guest's food every day isn't the way to treat a guest, right? The emphasis on the words Central Plains etiquette made Xiao Yun's expression change slightly. She habitually looked towards Mo Jingli. Yi Li didn't plan on stalling for time. She looked at Xiao Yun with a cold smile and said, I'll have to trouble Miss Xiao Yun to prepare a few fast horses. Also, it's said that this consort's 2 maids are missing. I'll have to trouble you to send them back. Otherwise, this consort can't guarantee that this consort will be able to return Prince unharmed. Xiao Yun finally put away the smile on her face. Her delicate little face was filled with malice. Prince is Da Chu State's King Li. If you hurt him, don't even think about escaping responsibility. Yi Li raised her brows and said with a smile, You're saying it like you don't know that Ai's consort is Da Chu State's consort. Kidnapping Ai's consort, even if it's your King Li, he won't be able to escape responsibility. If you're smart, then immediately do as I say. Otherwise, even if I can't leave, I can guarantee that your King Li will die a horrible death. And San, if anyone dares to act rashly, just greet King Li. There's no need to be polite. If anything happens, this consort will take responsibility. And San excitedly replied in a clear voice, This subordinate will follow your orders. Mo Jingli gave a cold snort and said, You don't need to threaten Ai Xiao Yun, get someone to do as she says. I will personally send them out. Xiao Yun was a bit hesitant and wanted to object, but seeing An San's cold dagger on Mo Jingli's waist, she swallowed her words. Staring at Yi Li, she warned, If anything happens to Prince, even if you go to the ends of the earth, I won't let you go. Yi Li smiled and said, Don't worry, I'm not interested in your prince. But you, be careful, don't let me see you again. And San brought along Mo Jingli, whose acupuncture points were sealed. The other 3 guards walked out of the courtyard beside Yi Li. Before, the 4 of them had silently taken down many guards. Now that they were swaggering out, no one came forward to be an eyesore. Outside the gate, there were several horses parked outside. An Yi and an went forward to check and nodded to Yi Li. Yi Li ordered, and San, take King Li. Let's go. Chapter 157. Xiao Yun, who had followed them out, quickly came forward. The horses have already been given to you, why haven't you released Prince yet? And San sneered, Do you think we're stupid? If we release Prince Li now, wouldn't it be perfect for you to catch us again? Casually throwing the immobile Mo Jingli onto the back of the horse, and San also jumped onto the horse. Yi Li sat on the back of the horse and smiled at Xiao Yun. Don't worry, I promise I'll let your prince return safely. But, if I find that there's someone who shouldn't be following us, I'll let someone stab Prince Li in the back. Xiao Yun gritted her teeth, but Mo Jingli was in Yi Li's hands, so she couldn't do anything. She could only hatefully say, Don't worry, I won't let anyone chase after you. I hope Consort Ding will keep her word. Same to you. The 5 horses galloped at full speed, only slowing down after running for over 20 miles. And Yi looked back at the road and said, It seems like the other side is keeping their word and didn't send anyone to chase after us. And San snorted, If they want Prince Li to be covered in holes, then they can just follow. Mo Jingli, who was forced to lie on the back of the horse, had already turned ashen from the jolting. He glared at Yi Li as if he wanted to eat her. It was a pity that no matter how fierce his gaze was, it had no effect and was selectively ignored by Yi Li. Princess, are we returning to the palace now? Prince is very worried about Princess's safety. And Yi asked in a deep voice. Yi Li shook her head and said with a smile, I'm not going back. 2, 3, 4, and 6 gazes all focused on Yi Li. Yi Li smiled as she looked at the pale Mo Jingli and said with a smile, It's rare that Prince Li worked so hard to kidnap this consort, we can't just let it go like this. Mo Jingli stared vigilantly at Yi Li and said, What do you want to do? Yi Li's smile was gentle and harmless, I don't want to do anything. Even if I want to do something, I won't tell you, Prince. He bent down and raised his hand, stabbing Mo Jingli's neck. The dizzy Mo Jingli completely fainted. The 4 shadow guards did not know what Yi Li wanted to do. They could only look at Yi Li, hoping that Wang Fei would give them instructions. Yi Li smiled and said, "Let's find a suitable place to throw Prince Li away. Let's change horses and play somewhere else." Wang Fei, Prince. Although they only obeyed Wang Fei's orders, they still had to remind Wang Fei that the prince was still worried about her safety. Yi Li tilted her head and thought for a moment. It's already spring. His body should be fine for the time being. Third, when dealing with Mo Jingli, send a letter to Prince. We'll go back later. Yes, Wang Fei. And San smiled. He felt that following Wang Fei was really full of surprises. Compared to the boring days of the other shadow guards, it was much more interesting. Don't call me Wang Fei. Gongzi Chu. Yes, Gongzi. And San went to deal with Mo Jingli and the letter. And San went to deal with the horses and clean up the traces they left on the road. And Yi silently followed Yi Li, who was walking leisurely. As they walked, Yi Li did not forget to ask about the events of the past few days. The disappearance of Qing Luan and Qing Yu made her a little worried. Qing Yu and Qing Luan were left outside Yaohua Palace. They should have been taken away when they wanted to rush in when the fire started. Why did Mo Jingli kidnap the 2 girls? No. It's impossible for Mo Jingli to take so many people out of the palace without anyone knowing. So, Qing Yu and Qing Luan should still be in the palace. Wang Fei. And Yi was very impressed with the master he had served for a long time. If it weren't for Wang Fei secretly teaching the 4 of them a lot of skills in the past 6 months, they wouldn't have found the clues left by Wang Fei so quickly this time and found the hidden manor on the outskirts of the capital. Wang Fei is worried about Qing Luan and Qing Yu. If the 2 girls are still in the palace, Prince must have a way to find them. Wang Fei doesn't have to worry. Yi Li frowned slightly and sighed softly in her heart. If they are just imprisoned, it's fine. I'm afraid. If the shadow guards in the palace can't find them, then it's useless for us to be anxious here. He believed that the heavens would help the 2 ladies and nothing would happen to them. If the 2 girls are really in the hands of Li Wang, even if it's for Li Wang's safety, they will teach them. Yi Li nodded and said, I hope so. Let's go, we still have to stay in the capital for half a month. During this time, Leton San and Ansai try to enter the palace to see if there are any clues. And Yi was stunned and quickly followed, Yes, Wang Fei, we are leaving the capital. That's right. In a nameless small courtyard on the outskirts of the capital, it was obviously empty at this time. The owner obviously left in a hurry and didn't even have time to take away the many precious antiques and paintings in the room. Mo Xiaoyao sat in the small garden and looked at the peach tree that was obviously just planted and the poisonous flowers and plants in the flower bed. Shen Yang followed beside Mo Xiaoyao and clicked his tongue in amazement. To plant all these poisonous flowers and plants together was not something an ordinary doctor could do. The other party must be a master of poison. Shen Yang was even pleasantly surprised to find several rare poisonous plants in the flower bed that he couldn't find anywhere. He didn't care about others and quickly and carefully removed all the useful herbs with the roots and soil, preparing to bring them back and plant them in his own medicine field. Prince, we are a step late. The person has already left. Feng Jiao came out of the room and presented a book to Mo Xiaoyao, saying, Wang Fei really did live here before. This should have been left behind by Wang Fei. Mo Xiaoyao took the book and opened it. It was a normal book of poems with a slip of paper inside. It was unknown what was used to write a few faint red words on it. Safe, don't worry. Feng Jiao looked at Mo Xiaoyao's expression and continued, There are several hidden places in the courtyard that have traces of fighting and the smell of blood. In addition, the charcoal ash in the kitchen is still warm. The person should not have left for long. In this subordinate's opinion, it should be Wang Fei's shadow guard that found Wang Fei first. Feng Jiao was complaining in his heart. Why didn't the shadow guard inform them that they had found Wang Fei and everything would have been fine if they had saved Wang Fei together? Now that everyone was gone, they only knew that there had been a fight, but they did not know whether Wang Fei had been rescued or not. Looking at Mo Xiaoyao's increasingly gloomy expression, Feng Jiao began to envy Leng Haoyu who had gone to the south. Where is Mo Jingli? Feng Jiao hesitated before saying, No one has seen Mo Jingli yet, but he is Li Wang. It is impossible for him to disappear for a long time. However, we did not catch him on the spot, nor did we find Wang Fei, so there is no evidence to accuse him. Feng Zhiyao had to admit that he had underestimated Mo Jingli. There was nothing in this courtyard that was related to Mo Jingli. Even the owner of this courtyard was an unrelated and ignorant ordinary merchant. All they knew now was that there should have been a woman living in this courtyard for a long time, but her identity, age, and appearance were unknown. Shun Yang, who was squatting in the flower bed and processing herbs, said, "The person who originally lived here should have been a woman from the south." Chapter 158. Feng Zhiyao raised an eyebrow. "How does Mr. Chen know?" Chen Yang pointed at the flower bed and said, "In this garden, other than the peach trees, everything else is poisonous. There are a few kinds of poisonous plants that are unique to Nanjiang. Not to mention the people of Dachu State, even the people of Nanjiang who are not proficient in poisons may not be able to recognize them. There's also this." Chen Yang took out a small shiny object from the soft soil under the peach trees and threw it to Feng Zhiyao. Feng Zhiyao weighed it in his hand. "What is this thing?" "It looks like a girl's jewelry." Mo Xiaoyao glanced at it and lightly said, "That's a piece of jewelry used by Nanjiang women. Also, it should only be used by the unmarried women of Nanjiang's noble families. There should be a mark on the back of the sapphire. That is the emblem of a large clan in Nanjiang. Send someone to check it out later." Feng Zhiyao flipped the sapphire over and looked at it for a long time before finally finding a small and blurry mark in a hidden corner. If it wasn't for Mo Xiaoyao's reminder, he would have thought it was a flaw in the jewelry and wouldn't have even noticed it. Clan emblem. Nanjiang people like to carve their clan emblem on jewelry. Chen Yang shook his head and said, "In Nanjiang, the clan emblem represents their status and glory. It's not just jewelry. They also like to print their clan emblem on their clothes. In Nanjiang, most people can recognize the clan emblem of these large clans. Normal people will automatically avoid them when they see them. Li wouldn't bury something useless here." Mo Xiaoyao lightly said, "It looks like Li has already left." Feng Zhiyao nodded and put away the sapphire ornament. "All right, I'll send someone to check." "Your Highness." A guard came in with a letter in his hand. "This was found outside the door just now." Mo Xiaoyao took the letter and opened it to read. His brows gradually furrowed. "Prince?" Mo Xiaoyao folded the letter and put it back in his sleeve. He raised his head and said to Feng Zhiyao, "Return to the capital." Then Princess Consort. It was sent by Miss Li's shadow guard. "Miss Li is out of danger. As for Mo Jingli, send someone to the forest 5 li west. Find Mo Jingli and bring him back to the capital. Remember, I want him to return to the Li Palace safely. Don't alarm anyone." Feng Zhiyao nodded. "Has Wang Fei already returned?" Mo Xiaoyao glanced at him and said, "It must be that the princess consort is missing. Everyone in the Prince Ding mansion must stop working and focus on finding the princess consort." Feng Zhiyao was startled. He could tell that Mo Xiaoyao was still in a bad mood, so he wisely swallowed his doubts. "Yes, I'll go now. Speaking of which, San and the others have improved a lot after following Wang Fei for half a year. They can come and go without a trace." While complaining, Feng Zhiyao quickly left to order people to work. The prince wasn't in a good mood, so it was better not to provoke him. But, the low pressure of the past few days should be over, right? On the streets of the capital, a white-clothed youth was strolling with a fan in his hand. The youth's face was like jade and his eyes were like shooting stars. Even though he looked slightly immature, it was believed that with time, he would become an elegant young master that wouldn't lose to any handsome man in the capital. Behind the youth were 2 tall guards. The people passing by couldn't help but take a few more looks. They secretly wondered which family's young master was bringing his guards out to play. San stood uncomfortably on the street, looking at the little Gongzi who was leisurely browsing through the street stalls in front of him. Without a trace, he used his elbow to nudge Sai beside him. "What do you think Wang, Gongzi wants to do?" Sai glanced at him, calmly saying, "Didn't Gongzi say to wait for boss news? You don't need to stroll on the street while waiting for news, right? If the people in the Fu find out, Thinking about how his master wasn't willing to return to the Fu after escaping danger, and San could almost imagine what Prince's expression would be like. Wang Fei was fine, but as the shadow guard, they would definitely be out of luck. And Sai's mouth twitched. He glanced at the white-clothed young master in front of him. That appearance, if you didn't know beforehand. If Wang Fei stood in front of you, would you be able to recognize her? Their family's master's level of cross-dressing as a man wasn't something that could be recognized at a glance like the young ladies who secretly ran out of their homes to play. From height to shape, from eyebrows to eyes, even the tone of her voice and the way she walked had been completely changed. Most importantly, even if an expert in disguise stood in front of her, they wouldn't be able to recognize her because she didn't use any disguise tools or human skin masks. If someone dared to point at the young master in front of them and say that he was a woman, they would definitely be spurned by everyone on the street. This was also why Wang Fei dared to stroll on the streets of Jing City. And San nodded in agreement. There were very few people in Jing City who recognized Wang Fei. If she could be recognized like this, then there was no justice. But, as a shadow guard, he wasn't used to standing in broad daylight. And Sai pulled at San, who was still in a daze. Why aren't you leaving? As long as you don't look like you're guilty, the shadow guard in the Fu won't recognize us. Don't forget what the young master said. San nodded and followed the white-clothed young master with Sai. Wang Fei said that she didn't need a shadow guard who could only protect her in the dark. She needed someone who could stand by her side and help her when she needed, even fight side by side and complete all kinds of missions. Yi Li finished her stroll and happily returned to the sky room of the inn she was temporarily staying at in Jing City. An Yi and an were already waiting in the room. An Yi took out a letter and said, "This is a letter from Shu Daren to Gongzi. He asks Gongzi to come to Jingling Temple outside the city tomorrow. Tomorrow, Shu Daren, Shu Furen, and the young masters of the Shu family will go to Jingling Temple to pray for Wang Fei." Yi Li nodded. She was a bit distressed about how she was going to explain to Jojo why she hadn't returned for so long and why they were worried, as well as what she was going to do next. Rubbing her forehead, she looked at an "Is there news from Qing Luan and Qing Yu?" An nodded and said, "Last night, the prince sent people to bring Qing Luan and Qing Yu back to the Fu, but..." An looked at Yi Li and frowned. They seem to have lost their memories. They can't remember what happened at the time. The shadow guard seemed to have found them in the cold palace. Lost their memories? Yi Li frowned. What did the prince say? The prince had them recuperate in the Fu and no one was allowed to come in contact with them. Shen Xiansheng was also sent to treat them. The Fu was heavily guarded. Although this subordinate was familiar with the terrain, he didn't dare to get too close. So the details of the situation weren't found out. An said with some shame. "You've done very well." Yi Li was well aware of how the Fu was guarded. It was already very good that an could sneak in and come out safely without alerting anyone. Yi Li frowned slightly. Mo Xiaoyao separated Qing Yu and Qing Luan. It seemed to be to let them recuperate in peace, but it wasn't that he didn't suspect their intentions. After getting along for nearly a year, compared to Qing Xia, who was originally by old Madame Yi's side, and Qing Shuang, who was still young and had a more active temper, she usually relied on Qing Luan and Qing Yu more. Because of the trust she had for her uncle and grandfather, Yi Li never thought that Qing Luan and Qing Yu would betray her. After a moment of silence, Yi Li decided not to get involved in this matter for the time being. She was about to leave the capital. Originally, she didn't plan to bring those maids. Mo Xiaoyao also wouldn't casually dispose of the people around her. Then, let Mo Xiaoyao see if they could be trusted. Chapter 159. After the morning court the next day, Imperial Censor Shu took his wife and several nephews out of the city to Jingling Temple to burn incense. At this time, it did not attract too much attention. After all, the Shu family's love for their nieces was obvious to all in the capital. In the past, Imperial Censor Shu had not hesitated to go against the Shengshu Fu and Prince Li in order to stand up for his niece. After that, when Princess Ding married, the young masters of the Shu family all came out to send off their cousin. Now that Princess Ding had mysteriously disappeared in the fire, It was normal for the Shu family to go to the temple to burn incense and pray for Princess Ding. And people like the Emperor or Prince Li who might pay attention to this matter were dizzy from the waves caused by Princess Ding's disappearance. They naturally did not have the time to pay attention to whether their officials were resting at home or going to the temple to burn incense after court. As Yi Li's close friend and the future second madam of the Shu family, Qin Zheng also went with Madame Shu. She was truly worried about her missing friend. After entering Jingling Temple, she accompanied Madame Shu to worship all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in the temple. Madame Shu was more and more satisfied with this gentle and pleasant future daughter-in-law. After praying to Buddha, Madame Shu went to the side room to rest. Qin Zheng dismissed the maidservants and chanted sutras and prayed alone in the silent hall. However, she was startled by a clear voice in her ear. "Miss Qin." Qin Zheng was shocked. Turning back, she saw a handsome youth dressed in moon-white cloth standing beside her. Qin Zheng frowned. She felt that the young man smiling at her was strangely familiar, but she was sure that she did not know this young man. "May I know who young master is? Why are you here?" Qin Zheng stood up and stared warily at the youth in front of her. She silently took a few steps to the side. Yi Li saw this and smiled faintly in her heart. She pretended not to know. Lifting her clothes, she knelt on the mat in front of the Buddha statue and prayed like Qin Zheng. He turned back to look at Qin Zheng, who was looking at him, and smiled. "I'm naturally here to pray. Miss Qin, don't be nervous. This one and second young master Shu are old acquaintances. I'll have to trouble you to tell second young master Shu that this one's surname is Chu Junwei." Qin Zheng was startled for a moment and seemed to understand something. She nodded calmly and said to Yi Li, "I understand. I will pass on your message." Then, "Thank you, Miss Qin," Yi Li said with a smile. Yi Li was resting in the back hall of the Buddha Hall. This was a Buddha hall in the Jingling Temple that was rarely visited. It was located in a remote area, and the Buddha worshipped was not very prominent. Therefore, other than the young Buddhist monks who were sweeping, very few people came here. Yi Li opened her eyes and got up. She saw Shu Hongyang and Shu Qingze standing at the door, looking at her with furrowed brows. Yi Li smiled brightly. "Second uncle, second brother, don't you recognize me?" Shu Hongyang looked at her for a long time, then shook his head and said, "You little girl, I didn't recognize you when we met outside." Shu Qingze's cold face had a bit more warmth than usual. He silently nodded his head, indicating that he also didn't recognize her. Yi Li smiled apologetically. "I saw that second uncle seemed to be talking with Abbot Fang Zhong. It wasn't convenient for Li to go over, so I could only ask second uncle and second brother to come here." The three people sat down. Shu Hongyang looked at her male attire and frowned. He scolded, "You little girl, since you're already out of danger, why didn't you return to the Wang Fu? If it wasn't for Prince Ding sending a letter saying that you were fine, the letter to Yunju would have been sent out. Do you want to worry your grandfather to death?" Looking at second uncle's anxious appearance, Yi Li felt very guilty. She blinked her eyes and looked at him pitifully. "Second uncle, Leah knows she was wrong. But, there's no benefit for Leah to go back now. If they don't succeed this time, they will naturally have a next time. It's better to do it like it is now. I'm in the dark and they're in the light. Let's see who's scheming who." Shu Hongyang glared at her and said, "Your calculations are good. Right now, the rumors in the marketplace are that Prince Ding has jinxed his wife." Yi Li smiled and said, "There's nothing wrong with that. Even if I'm not here, Mo Xiaoyao won't be able to marry anyone else." Shu Qingze quietly sat on the side and listened to their conversation. He frowned and asked Yi Li, "What other plans does Leah have?" The future Wang Fei couldn't dress as a man and stay in Jing City for a long time. If she interacted with them too much, she would be discovered one day. Yi Li put away the smile on her face. She looked sternly at her uncle and cousin and said, "I'm preparing to go to Nanjiang." "Nonsense." Shu Hongyang angrily scolded. "Second uncle." Yi Li looked helplessly at Shu Hongyang. At the same time, she used her eyes to signal for Shu Qingze to speak for her. It was a pity that Shu Qingze also frowned and looked at her with a disapproving gaze. Xu Hongyang waved his hand and said, "Don't say anything. If you're impatient to stay in Jing City, then go to Yunju. It just so happens that you haven't seen your grandfather for many years." "Uncle, I'm the future Wang Fei. How can I run away just because I'm impatient to deal with the people and matters in Jing City? Then Mo Xiaoyao marrying me is a bit of a loss." Yi Li smiled and said. Xu Hongyang looked at her from the corner of his eyes and faintly said, "Could it be that you want to go to Nanjiang to do something? Are the people in the Ding Wang Fu all useless in the tavern? Do they need a Wang Fei like you to personally go to such a far place? Don't tell me. Go and explain to your grandfather and eldest uncle." "Second uncle." Yi Li looked at her own dressing. She really couldn't act like a spoiled girl. She could only look innocently at second uncle. "Eldest brother is also there. Second uncle doesn't need to worry about my safety." "Does Prince Ding know what you mean?" Xu Hongyang asked. Yi Li felt a little guilty. She still hadn't met Mo Xiaoyao. What does Yi Li want to do in Nanjiang? Xu Qingze looked at Yi Li and hit the nail on the head. Yi Li glanced at him grumpily but still answered honestly, "Now the situation in Nanjiang is worse than Jing City. I don't feel at ease with eldest brother alone in Nanjiang. It just so happens that Jing City doesn't need me to show my face for the time being. I want to go to Nanjiang to take a look." Xu Hongyang frowned. "Your eldest brother has a sense of propriety and will act according to his capabilities. What can a girl like you help with? As for Jing City, Prince Ding intends to use your disappearance to make the Emperor and Empress Dowager fight. They were already fighting fiercely, but they shouldn't have dragged the Ding Wang Fu into it." Yi Li frowned. "The Ding Wang Fu can't wait to be schemed against forever. Uncle must know why eldest brother went to Nanjiang. If Nanjiang isn't stable, the entire Da Chu state might fall into the flames of war. Since Li Er has already married into the Ding Wang Fu, the Ding Wang Fu's position is Li Er's position. I can't just sit in my boudoir and ignore everything like the other noblewomen. Other people won't give me this chance, right?" Xu Hongyang frowned. "You take care of the Wang Fu's matters and let Prince Ding have no worries. You have already fulfilled your responsibility as a Wang Fei. Since we are husband and wife, we should share trials and tribulations together. Prince's body is inconvenient and he can't travel far. What's wrong with me doing what he can't do?" Yi Li firmly said. Yi Li occasionally thought of Mo Xiaoyao's words and felt uneasy. If the situation in Nanjiang went out of control and developed into the situation they expected, Mo Xiaoyao would have to personally lead the troops without caring about his body. Yi Li didn't dare to imagine that with Mo Xiaoyao's body, if he really went to war, he wouldn't be able to come back alive. There was also Xu Qingchen. Young Master Qingchen's intelligence was unparalleled. But even if the Xu family was a 100-years-old clan, in terms of bodyguards, they couldn't be compared to the Imperial Wang Fu. And Yi Li clearly knew that Xu Qingchen was a weak young master who didn't know martial arts. Chapter 160. Yi Li looked at Xu Hongyang seriously and said, "Second uncle, Li Er knows what to do. I will definitely not put myself in danger." Seeing his niece's determined expression, Xu Hongyang sighed helplessly. "Li Er, you are a girl. You don't need to take all the responsibility. Whether it is your big brother or Prince Ding, their matters are not your responsibility." Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "I know. If Li Er doesn't know anything and doesn't know anything, then naturally you can stay in a safe place and let people protect you. But since I can help a little, why should I let big brother take the risk alone? Don't think that I don't know. Second brother, third brother, fourth brother, and fifth brother also want to go to Nanjiang to help big brother. It's just that they can't leave. Now I can use the excuse of going missing to help big brother so grandfather and uncle don't have to worry." Xu Hongyang glared at her unhappily. "Worry? How can you be at ease?" Yi Li blinked. "Second uncle, you should admit that I am stronger than third brother. You are already at ease with third brother going to the military camp. Why can't you be at ease with Li Er? He is a man. It doesn't matter which one of them is injured. Can you compare?" Xu Hongyang said. But Yi Li saw a trace of hesitation. She hurriedly tried to persuade him, "I'm not going alone. My secret guards will follow me. Second uncle. Shu Hongyang was helpless and could only say, "You are already married. Go ask Prince Ding. If Prince Ding doesn't agree, then it is useless to say anything to me." "Thank you, uncle." Yi Li was overjoyed. In her opinion, convincing her uncle was much more difficult than convincing Mo Xiaoyao. Shu Hongyang looked at her face full of joy and sighed helplessly. It was no good for a girl to be too weak, just like his little sister Li Er's mother. It was even worse for a girl to be too strong and intelligent, just like this niece of his. He only hoped that Prince Ding could suppress her and let her stay in the capital or return to Yunju. Deep in the forest outside the jingling temple, Mo Xiaoyao was alone in his wheelchair, resting with his eyes closed. The faint slanting sunlight shone through the treetops and onto his body, making the still somewhat chilly early spring have a faint hint of warmth. "Xiaoyao." Yi Li approached and saw the thin and tired face of the man leaning on the wheelchair. Her heart trembled, and she couldn't help but feel a little guilty and worried. Mo Xiaoyao opened his eyes and looked up at her. He was startled at first, but then he smiled and said, "No wonder so many people couldn't find Mr. Li. If I didn't look carefully, I probably wouldn't be able to recognize Mr. Li." Yi Li walked up to him and looked at Mo Xiaoyao's smiling eyes. She said in a low voice, "I'm sorry for making you worry. Li, are you still not going to go back?" Mo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li with a calm and gentle gaze as he asked softly. Yi Li shook her head and looked at him. "I want to go to Nanjiang." Mo Xiaoyao frowned. "If Mr. Li is worried about Brother Shu, I'll let Feng-san go to Nanjiang to help him." Yi Li shook her head. "Leng Haoyu is not in the capital. Only Feng Zhiyao and Chief Steward Mo are helping you. How can you send Feng Zhiyao out? Besides, it's not a good time for me to go back now, is it?" If she went back now, she definitely needed to find out who did it in the palace. Just as Mo Jingli said, even if it was for the sake of the Ding Manor's face, they couldn't let the person who kidnapped the Ding Manor's consort get away with it. And once the Ding Manor targeted Mo Jingli, then the one who would benefit from it would be Mo Jingqi. It was better now. The Ding Manor's consort went missing in the palace. No matter what, they would stand on the Ding Manor's side. Just let Mo Jingli and Mo Jingqi fight among themselves. Although Mo Jingli knew that she had escaped, he still had to swallow this loss. He couldn't admit that he kidnapped Princess Ding and then she escaped from his hands, right? If Mr. Li feels bored in the capital, you can go to Yunju. When the matter is over, I'll come to pick you up and bring you back to the capital, okay? Mo Xiaoyao pulled Yi Li in front of him and raised his head to ask. Yi Li bit her red lips and looked at Mo Xiaoyao with determination. She knew that this man wanted to protect her, but even if she felt warm and moved, she wasn't a weak woman who could stand behind a man and watch others go through life and death. Besides, it wasn't just for Mo Xiaoyao. Her family and brothers were also involved in this dispute. In the foreseeable future, there might be an uncle who doted on her and an old grandfather. "I'll bring the shadow guard. I won't put myself in danger." Yi Li softly rejected Mo Xiaoyao's suggestion. A trace of disappointment could be clearly seen in Mo Xiaoyao's gentle eyes. Yi Li quickly averted her eyes. After being together for half a year, she had gradually gotten used to Mo Xiaoyao's gentle and indifferent voice and aura. Mo Xiaoyao rarely asked her for anything, but Yi Li suddenly realized that even if it was Mo Xiaoyao's request, she rarely fulfilled it. Thinking about it, no matter how one looked at it, she didn't seem to be a good wife. "Li, I'm sorry. It's all because of me." "No." Yi Li interrupted him. "I know that if I want to, I can always stay in a safe place. You can arrange everything for me. But, Xiaoyao, I don't want that. I don't want to hide behind you. If I'm destined to be with someone for the rest of my life, I hope that I can stand by his side and not hide under his wings. Do you understand?" Mo Xiaoyao's fingers almost imperceptibly trembled. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Then, be careful." Li, after saying this, he took out a piece of warm jade tied with a red silk ribbon and placed it in Yi Li's hand. He smiled faintly and said, "Keep it well. Don't lose it." Yi Li played with the warm jade in her hand. It was a dragon yazi carved from the highest quality mutton fat white jade. Even though it was carved from warm white jade, one could still feel the domineering aura of a dragon and the cold killing intent of a Yazi. Yi Li held it in her hand and looked at Mo Xiaoyao. This. Mo Xiaoyao smiled faintly. This is an ancestral jade pendant. I wanted to give it to Li Li a long time ago. Don't lose it. It's the same as the cloud-grasping sword. They're both family heirlooms. Yi Li was speechless. She silently put away the jade pendant. Seeing Yi Li's figure disappear into the forest, the warm smile on Mo Xiaoyao's face gradually disappeared. He looked down at his crippled legs. His indifferent eyes were filled with anger and unwillingness. Bang! With a wave of his hand, a large tree nearby snapped. Mo Xiaoyao coughed a few times. His face was tired as he leaned against his wheelchair. You really are trash. With Prince's current body, it's best not to get angry so easily. Shen Yang walked out of the forest and frowned as he looked at the tree trunk on the ground. Mo Xiaoyao walked in front of him. As expected, he saw that the white handkerchief in his hand was stained red. A Jin followed behind Shen Yang and looked worriedly at Mo Xiaoyao. Wang Fei is a very special woman. Prince should feel happy that he has married such a Wang Fei. Looking in the direction that Yi Li had left, Shen Yang said thoughtfully. Mo Xiaoyao said coldly, You say that I should feel happy that my Wang Fei is in danger. Shen Yang looked at the hand that was clenched on his knee and said in a rare tone of an elder, Even though this may hurt Prince's pride, but I feel that Wang Fei does not need Prince's protection. Wang Fei's present appearance is much more real and moving than her noble appearance in the Wang Fu, isn't it? Or is it that Prince Ding is like the common people and prefers a woman who is like a dodder flower that depends on you? Chapter 161. That's enough. Mo Xiaoyao said in a low voice, I know what to do. Let's go back. Ah Jin pushed Mo Xiaoyao to the other side of the forest. Shen Yang shook his head and followed. Prince Li's mansion. Mo Jingli sat in the study, his expression dark as he stared at the person kneeling in front of him. You're saying that you still haven't found any trace of Yi Li? The middle-aged man kneeling on the ground could clearly feel Mo Jingli's anger and secretly complained in his heart. Prince, please forgive me. This subordinate has already sent people to carefully search the area within 100 li from where Princess Ding disappeared, but they haven't found any trace of Princess Ding. Mo Jingli snorted coldly. Yi Li hasn't returned to the Prince Ding mansion, nor has she returned to the Yi family or the Shu family. Could it be that she can fly and burrow into the ground? The middle-aged man hurriedly said, Prince, although we tampered with the horses, Princess Ding seems to have discovered this matter. She made the horses run in 2 directions, east and west, and drew our pursuers away. So you're telling I that your brains aren't as good as a woman's? Mo Jingli sneered as he spat out mockery. The middle-aged man lowered his head in shame, but he couldn't help but complain in his heart, Is Princess Ding an ordinary woman? It's not the first time that Prince has been unlucky in her hands, so it's understandable that they failed, right? Get out. Keep an eye on the Prince Ding mansion for I don't believe that Yi Li won't return. After chasing his subordinates out, Mo Jingli fell into deep thought. Yi Li not returning to the mansion after escaping was indeed out of Mo Jingli's expectations. But he didn't know whether he should be relieved or angry. This choice was like asking him to choose between facing the Ding King's residence and his brother, the Emperor. If Yi Li returned to the Prince Ding mansion safely, then neither he nor Mo Xiaoyao would be able to retreat. At that time, the one who would benefit would be his brother, the Emperor, who was sitting high on the dragon throne. But now, Mo Xiaoyao was busy looking for Yi Li and even caused trouble for him from time to time. He should take advantage of this opportunity. But if he and Mo Jingqi were both injured, Prince, what's wrong? Are you in a bad mood? A charming young girl walked out from the inner room and looked at Mo Jingli with a smile on her face. Yi Li hasn't returned home yet. Your tracking drug is useless. Yi Li has already disappeared. Mo Jingli looked at the pretty and cute young girl in front of him and said in a deep voice. Xiao Yun, who had already changed out of her simple maid costume and appeared more charming, had a strange look in her eyes. She said in surprise, This Princess Ding is quite capable. Even the most famous poison expert couldn't detect the soul-chasing incense I used. Tilting her head and pinching the small braids in front of her chest, Xiao Yun blinked and looked at Mo Jingli. Do you need me to find Princess Ding? I will definitely find her. Mo Jingli glanced at her. Find her? If you really find her, will you be able to return? Mo Jingli felt that after several confrontations with Yi Li, he still hadn't completely figured out how strong she was. Also, the 4 shadow guards by her side were definitely not simple. If Xiaoyun was killed by someone alone, even her bones wouldn't be able to be found. You stay in the palace obediently and don't run around. If you ruin Ai's plan, I won't care if I can explain it to your sister. Xiaoyun bit her lips and glared at Mo Jingli with hidden bitterness. Unfortunately, Mo Jingli wasn't someone who would go easy on girls. With a cold snort, he picked up the scroll on the table and lowered his head to read. He completely ignored Xiao Yun. Xiao Yun's eyes turned and she walked to Mo Jingli's side. She said in a low voice, Jingli Gij, can I help you poison Mo Shouyao and the Emperor to death? If you want to die, then go ahead and try, Mo Jingli said. Did she think that no one had tried to poison Mo Shouyao in all these years? But Mo Shouyao was still living well with his sickly and crippled body. Instead, those assassins were long gone and no one knew where their corpses were. Jiangnan Guangling City. Compared to the cold spring in the north, Jiangnan at the beginning of March was already a scene of flowers blooming and thriving. Guangling City was the largest city in the south and it was also the former capital of the previous dynasty. Even though the previous dynasty had been destroyed, Guangling City's position as the political, economic and cultural center of the south had not been shaken. And because Taizu had established the capital here in the early years, even though the capital had been moved to the north, Guangling City had been preserved as a subsidiary capital. Compared to the political and military position of the Chu capital, Guangling City was more inclined towards culture and economy. 3 of the 4 richest merchants of the Da Chu state lived in Guangling City. From this, it could be seen that Guangling City's wealth was far greater than the Chu capital in the north. In the night, Yi Li leisurely strolled through the noisy streets filled with the smell of cosmetics. The noise on both sides of the street was filled with the smell of alcohol and rouge. What entered his ears was the sound of music. And San awkwardly followed Yi Li as he pushed away the warm and gentle women that came to pull him and his Wang Fei. He was complaining inside. If he had known that Wang Fei would run to a place like this, he wouldn't have fought with Laro Da to trade. Woo-woo. If the prince knew that he was going to a brothel with Wang Fei, he would definitely kill him. Yi Li walked as he looked back to admire Ansan's embarrassed state. Just as Ansan couldn't take it anymore, he finally stopped and said with a smile, "We're here." Ansan let out a sigh of relief and raised his head to look at the roadside. Under the dim light of the night, by the side of the quiet lake, there stood a serene and elegant pavilion. On the plaque above the door, there were a few large words written like dragons and phoenixes, breeze and moonfloor. As a shadow guard specially trained by the Ding King's Fu, Ansan naturally knew what kind of place the wind and moonfloor was. The #1 brothel in the world. It was said that this place had the most fragrant wine, the best food, and the most beautiful and talented women in the world. This was the land of warmth and tenderness that every man dreamed of and would rather not wake up from. Gongzi. Yi Li looked at him and smiled. What? The #1 brothel in the world isn't enough for you? Ansan grimaced. Gongzi, are we really going in? Yi Li smiled. Do you think I'm taking you out for a walk? Let's go. Opening the fan in his hand, Yi Li smiled as he stepped into the wind and moon floor. Since the wind and moon floor could become the #1 brothel in the world, it naturally had its extraordinary aspects. Stepping into the lobby, what greeted them wasn't a vulgar brothel keeper with heavy makeup, but 2 young women with light eyebrows and delicate makeup. Seeing Yi Li wearing an ice blue brocade robe with silver embroidery and a top-quality jade pendant on his white belt, holding a fan in his hand and looking relaxed, it was clear that he had an extraordinary presence. They quickly came forward. Greetings to Gongzi. This Gongzi looks unfamiliar. Is it your first time coming to the wind and moon floor? Yi Li smiled and nodded. That's right, this Gongzi just came to Jiangnan. I've admired the wind and moon floor for a long time and wanted to see it. The woman smiled. Gongzi's presence really brings light to my humble brothel. Gongzi, please come to the private room to enjoy the song and dance, and see if there's anything you like. Yi Li smiled. This Gongzi heard that your brothel doesn't only specialize in song and dance. Why don't you introduce some interesting things? This woman was in charge of the Wind and Moon Floor's reception, so she was naturally an insightful person. Looking at Yi Li, although his clothing and bearing were extraordinary, he was definitely not older than 13 years old. 13-year-old immature youths were interested in fragrant and warm jade, but there were also some who hadn't been enlightened yet. Seeing the young Gongzi's noble and proud appearance, he must be some family's young Gongzi who came out to have fun. The woman covered her mouth and smiled. Little Gongzi, if you don't like our Moonfloor's girls, they will be sad. Our Moonfloor's girls are indeed not only good at song and dance, but what does little Gongzi like? Chapter 162. Yi Li frowned. This young master originally wanted to gamble a few rounds for fun, but this Guangling City's gambling house is a bit too noisy. It's really disappointing to have all kinds of people mixed together. The girl pursed her lips and smiled. So, young master, please follow me. Behind Yi Li, and San, who was acting as a wooden stake, moved her lips as if she wanted to say something, but when she saw Yi Li's warm smile, she awkwardly closed her mouth. Even the brothel had entered. What was there to be afraid of in the gambling house? The gambling house of the Wind and Moon House was naturally different from the gambling houses outside. No matter if it was serving tea or being the banker, they were all women. Entering the hall, the first thing that came into sight was a beautiful purple-clothed girl holding a dice cup and gently shaking it. There were a lot of gamblers gathered around. Yi Li smiled. Betting big or small was the most monotonous but also the most classic game in the gambling house. Adding on the fact that the banker was a stunning beauty, it naturally attracted countless people to throw in their money. The woman leading the way naturally saw the look in Yi Li's eyes and immediately smiled. This young lady is one of the 12 most popular girls in the Wind and Moon Pavilion, Miss Ru Mai. She's best at shaking dice. Even our house master praises her skills. After speaking, the girl very considerately introduced Yi Li to the situation of the gambling house. For example, among the 12 leading girls of the Wind and Moon House, 3 of them were the bankers of this gambling house. Moreover, these 3 girls were all artists. Only those who beat them in gambling could become the guests behind the curtain. Up until now, no one had succeeded. Yi Li laughed involuntarily. Han Mingyu really knew how to make money. Ordinary men naturally went to the brothel for the beauty. But those who could enter the Wind and Moon House were mostly wealthy people. What kind of beauty hadn't they seen before? Setting up this kind of gambling house was naturally more attractive than ordinary gambling houses. Men all had the desire to conquer. Those men who had money and leisure wanted to get close to a woman, naturally wouldn't be stingy with spending a lot of money. San, what do you think of Miss Ru Mai? Yi Li pointed at the purple-clothed woman not far away with her folding fan and asked with a smile. And San tried his best not to make his face twist, replying with a wooden face, replying to the young master, of course it's a beauty. Millimeter, this young master thinks so too. Yi Li rested her chin on her folding fan and said with a smile, why don't we have a chat tonight? Maybe we can. Young master, your family won't be happy. Ansan gritted her teeth and reminded. I know, so, this young master will give you the chance to get intimate with her. Yi Li smiled wholeheartedly as she looked at Ansan's ink-like face. She happily walked over to the gambling table. Miss Ru Mai shook the dice and looked at the gathered gamblers with a smile on her lips. The greed and lust in the eyes of these men made her feel disdain, but the smile on her face became even more charming. Yi Li, who suddenly squeezed to the front, made her stare blankly for a moment. This young master was only 13 or 14 years old, but the high-quality clothes and accessories on his body showed that his background wasn't ordinary. The youth's clear eyes made her feel that this youth was different from others. She smiled brightly at him. Young master, do you want to bet? Yi Li tilted his head and looked left and right. It was worthy of being called the world's #1 gambling house. The gambling money on the table was at least 50 taels. The money these rich people casually bet for fun was enough for an ordinary person to live for half a year. The nearby gamblers saw that the one who squeezed in was a child still smelling of his mother's milk. They couldn't help but show contempt and ridicule in their eyes. There were even quite a few people who made mocking hisses. Yi Li didn't care. Beaming, she took out a 50 taels silver ingot and threw it on the table. She smiled and said, "I bet big." Rumei smiled and swept her gaze over the surrounding gamblers. There was no difference between the rich and powerful in the gambling house and the common people. They all started to jeer, "Big, big, small, small, small." Rumei's red lips slightly lifted. She raised her hand and opened the dice cup on the table. She smiled and said, 2, 4, 4, small. Some people were happy and some people were sad. Yi Li didn't care about the 50 taels that she lost. She patiently waited for the next round. This time, she still bet 50 taels. It was still big. She opened it again. It was still small. For the third round, Yi Li increased it to 200 taels. It was still big. Throwing the dice didn't take much time. It was only a quarter of an hour, but Yi Li had already lost nearly 2,000 taels. The nearby gamblers all looked at this generous young master with some surprise. They guessed which family's young master this was. "Young master, are you still betting?" Rumei smiled and asked Yi Li. Yi Li raised her hand and Yi Li, who was standing behind her, obediently took out a stack of banknotes and handed it to Yi Li. Large and small banknotes totaled 20,000 taels. Seeing Yi Li throw the banknotes on the table without any heartache, Ansan's heart twitched. He acted like a generous young master from a rich family. It was true that the Ding imperial residence was rich, but they didn't have much money right now. When they left the capital, their master brought a total of 20,000 taels of banknotes and some loose cash with them. 20,000 taels was a lot. It was enough for their group of 5 to comfortably make a few trips to the southern border. But in the casino, 20,000 taels wasn't too much. According to their master's attitude, they wouldn't even need 2 hours to lose everything. Yi Li increased the bet here. 500 taels. "Young master, are you betting big or small?" Rumei asked. Yi Li smiled and said, "This young master doesn't like small. I'm still betting big." Thus, all the gamblers placed their bets in the opposite direction. People with eyes could see how bad this young master's luck was. After losing another 10,000 taels, Yi Li finally smiled with satisfaction. When Rumei put down the dice cup again, she shook her head with a smile and said, "This time, I'm not following." Amidst the crowd's boos and noise, Rumei opened the dice cup. 3 sixes, kill all. The audience wailed. Another round began. Yi Li had already raised the bet to 1,000 taels. This time, it was different from the previous bad luck. Yi Li was like a god, small. The dice cup was opened. 1, 2, 4, small, big. 5, 5, 6, big, big. In less than an hour, the table in front of Yi Li was filled with a thick pile of banknotes and silver ingots. Ansan brought a chair over from somewhere for Yi Li to sit on. Yi Li comfortably leaned on the chair and looked at Rumei's face that was getting paler and paler. With an innocent smile, she put down the banknotes in her hand, 30,000 taels, small. Rumei's slender fingers paused and she slowly opened the dice cup. Everyone stared at the dice cup that was slowly leaving the table. 1, 1, 2, small. Standing behind Yi Li, Ansan looked worriedly at the banknotes that had increased on the table. Just now, he had been worried that after Wang Fei lost all the money, they would have to return to Jing with their tails between their legs. Now, he was worried that Wang Fei would win too much and they wouldn't be able to walk out of Breeze and Moon Tower. Without a change in expression, she supported her head with her hand and casually looked at Rumei's movements, all in. Big. Everyone present inhaled sharply. The banknotes and silver ingots in front of Yi Li added up to more than 100,000 taels. If they bet right, they would naturally win a full purse. If they bet wrong, then the 100,000 taels would be wasted. Even if everyone present was rich, there weren't many who had the courage to bet more than 100,000 taels. After all, their money was earned through hard work and didn't fall from the sky. Fine beads of sweat started to appear on Rumei's flawless forehead. Her beautiful eyes that stared at Yi Li were filled with shock and inquiry. Under everyone's gaze, she slowly reached out to open the dice cup. Everyone exclaimed, 3, 3. Chapter 163. Yu Mai's hand trembled, her face as white as paper. Gongzi is so strong. Yu Mai said with a bleak expression. Yi Li smiled but didn't say anything. In the past, for an undercover mission, she had specially learned gambling from a gambling king for several months. The other party had praised her for her talent. And with her eyesight and hearing, it was impossible for Yu Mai to cheat in front of her. Of course, Yi Li thought that in a place like the Wind and Moon Pavilion, the banker wouldn't cheat for a few hundred taels of silver. If that was the case, it would damage the reputation of Han Mingyue's Wind and Moon Pavilion too much. But if she continued to win, it wouldn't be certain. After all, Han Mingyue's reputation of loving money like his life was as famous as his Wind and Moon Pavilion. This Gongzi, our pavilion master, invites Gongzi inside for a chat. When Yi Li was hesitating whether to continue or not, a young man who looked like a manager walked out, cupping his hands and smiling at Yi Li. Yi Li's eyes turned and she said with a smile, Gongzi Mingyu has invited me. This Gongzi is also very fortunate. But, the Wind and Moon Pavilion won't murder for money, right? The young man's mouth twitched, his smile a bit forced. Gongzi is joking. Yi Li stood up and casually stuffed the banknotes into Ansan's hands. When she stood up again, she brushed her clothes and said with a smile, please lead the way. The young man led Yi Li and Ansan into the small courtyard behind the gambling house. Light muslin curled around the pavilion by the lake, the pleasant sound of a guqin flowing through. Pavilion master. Withdraw. Why doesn't this Gongzi come in for a chat? The sound of the guqin paused and a low and pleasant male voice came from the pavilion. Yi Li slightly raised her eyebrows when she heard it. Seeing the young man respectfully withdraw, Yi Li said with a smile, the pavilion master of the Wind and Moon Pavilion has invited me. This one is very fortunate. Finishing, she gave Ansan a look to stay outside and went forward to lift the layers of muslin curtains to walk in. In the pavilion, a handsome man dressed in dark red brocade robes was lazily leaning against the zither table. His handsome face was filled with an evil charm. Seeing Yi Li come in, he raised his eyebrows and smiled. I didn't expect that the one who could defeat Rumei would be such a young master. What a rare young hero. May I dare to ask Gongzi's honorable surname and great given name? Yi Li laughed and said, how could I dare? A mere surname of Chu, Junwei. Chu Junwei? Good name. It's just that, this humble one has never heard of any young master surnamed Chu in Da Chu state who has such a bearing. If you are from the Viling Chu clan, you don't look like someone from the Viling, Han Mingyu said as she stared at Yi Li. Yi Li did not mind. She casually found a place to sit down and said with a smile, we are just a small family. We do not dare to trouble young master Mingyu to listen to us. Han Mingyu snorted and said, a small family? This young master doesn't look like one. Yi Li waved her fan and smiled calmly. What's so strange about that? This humble one also doesn't look like the legendary young master Mingyu. Oh! Han Mingyu raised her eyebrows with interest, but a sharp light flashed in her eyes. I wonder what the young master Mingyu you have heard of is like. Yi Li smiled and said, I have heard that young master Mingyu is elegant and extraordinarily handsome. He is a rare fine young master in the world. Han Mingyu frowned in apparent dissatisfaction. Could it be that this young master has disappointed young master Chu? Yi Li lowered her eyebrows and smiled. From what this humble one knows, young master Mingyu would definitely not sit like this in front of strangers. Looking at the handsome man kneeling beside the zither table with a lazy and devilish air, Yi Li could not help but sigh in her heart. In terms of appearance, the brothers Han Mingyu and Han Mingxi were at least 80% alike. If they could really fool others, it would not be impossible to fool them. However, the person in front of her clearly had no intention of concealing himself. Or perhaps he did not think that a 13 or 14-year-old stranger had seen Han Mingyu in person. Unfortunately, not only had she seen Han Mingyu, but she had also seen Han Mingxi. It seems that young Master Chu is certain that this young master is not Han Mingyu. Han Mingshi stood up and stared at Yi Li with a cold gaze. Yi Li smiled and said, "Young master, why are you so angry? You tricked this humble one into coming here in the name of young Master Mingyu. Shouldn't I be the one who should be angry?" Han Mingshi sneered. "Young Master Chu, why are you putting on an act? Didn't you spend so much money in the bright moon to attract the attention of the inn master? Why don't you tell this young master now? Perhaps this young master will agree to your request if I am in a good mood." Yi Li raised her eyebrows. "Young master, can you make the inn master of the Wind and Moon Inn? Or, can you make the Tianyi Pavilion's decision?" As soon as the words Tianyi Pavilion came out, Han Mingshi's gaze immediately shot toward Yi Li like a sword. His devilish handsome face suddenly became a bit colder. "Who are you?" There were many people in the world who knew about the Tianyi Pavilion, and even more people who knew about the Wind and Moon Inn. However, not many people knew that the inn master of the Wind and Moon Inn and the Tianyi Pavilion were the same person. Yi Li lowered her head and said, "Young master, before you ask me, you should at least tell me if I can make the decision or not. What if you can't make the decision after I've spent so much effort talking to you? Wouldn't that be a waste of each other's time?" Han Mingshi glared at Yi Li and snorted. "Han Mingyu is not in Jiangnan right now. Whether it is the Wind and Moon Inn or the Tianyi Pavilion, I can make the decision. Do you understand?" Yi Li clapped her hands and said with a smile, "That's good. Young master, may I know your name?" "Han Mingshi." Han Mingshi gritted his teeth. Of course, he wouldn't tell her what his nickname was. After all, the title of young Master Feng Yu was not a good one for both men and women. Yi Li raised a hand to rub between her brows and said in a low voice, "So you are young Master Mingyu's brother? No wonder you look so similar to young Master Mingyu. You've seen my big brother?" Han Mingshi stared at her and asked with a frown. Yi Li didn't change her expression and said with a smile, "Well, I saw young Master Mingyu once when he was young. I have a good memory and have always admired young Master Mingyu's elegance." Han Mingshi curled his lips. His big brother was indeed quite famous when he was young. However, that was in the Chu capital, so the people of Jiangnan didn't know much about him. However, was this young man in front of him 5 years old? Yi Li didn't care what Han Mingshi was thinking. "I've come from afar and you won't even give me a cup of tea. This is not how you treat a guest." Han Mingshi stared at her for a moment and then slowly pulled out a sinister smile. "If you want to drink tea, you can. If you have something to ask of me, you can. But you'll have to defeat me first." Yi Li looked at young Master Feng Yu, who was staring at her with a provocative expression, and secretly found it funny. Of course, she knew that Han Mingyu wasn't in Jiangnan right now. She even knew where Han Mingyu had gone. Although Han Mingyu and Han Mingshi were brothers, Han Mingshi was clearly much easier to deal with than Han Mingyu. For various reasons, Yi Li didn't want to meet Han Mingyu. "What does young Master Han want to bet?" Han Mingshi raised his eyebrows and smiled. "I won't take advantage of you. Weren't you very powerful just now? Let's bet on the dice and see who's bigger." Yi Li raised her eyebrows and didn't object. "Okay." Chapter 164. Han Mingshi smiled in satisfaction. "Good, straightforward. If you can beat this young master, no matter what request you have, this young master will help you." Yi Li smiled and said, "That won't be necessary. I'm not the type to ask for exorbitant prices. Even if I have a request, I won't let young Master Han suffer a loss. After all, doing business requires mutual benefits to last long, don't you think so?" "Interesting." Han Mingshi smiled and said, "What if you lose?" Yi Li said, "If I lose, then pretend I didn't mention today's matter. In addition, the 210,000 taels of silver I won at your restaurant will be the bet." "One round to determine the winner?" Han Mingshi asked. "Please." Yi Li raised her hand and gestured. Han Mingshi flicked his sleeve, and the guqin on the table flew out and landed on a nearby cabinet. Han Mingyu took out a set of dice and placed it on the table. She said proudly, "You can test the dice first." Yi Li shook her head and pushed the dice cup back. She smiled and said, "This one believes in Breeze and Moon Pavilion and young Master Han's reputation." "After you, young Master Han." Han Mingshi pursed his lips. "Are we going to see who's big or who's small?" Yi Li thought for a moment and said, "Big." Han Mingshi snorted lightly. He picked up the dice cup on the table and put the dice inside. Then, he slowly began to shake the dice. Yi Li leisurely admired Han Mingshi's movements as he shook the dice. She couldn't help but say that it was very pleasing to the eye. The dice cup in his hand was like a magic trick. Finally, he slammed it heavily on the table. Han Mingshi raised his eyebrows at Yi Li. He didn't even look at the dice cup. Yi Li calmly looked at the dice on the table. The original 3 dice had become 6. 3.5 dice cut diagonally in the middle. They neatly formed 6 pyramids on the table. "Young Master Han, you have good inner strength." 33 points. Han Mingshi was clearly in a good mood. He looked at Yi Li with a smile on his face. "It seems that this can't be used anymore. Young Master Chu can use a new one. I believe that young Master Chu wouldn't copy someone else's wisdom, right?" Yi Li looked calm. She calmly took a new set of ivory dice from Han Mingshi and threw them into the dice cup. Unlike Han Mingshi's variety of shaking methods, Yi Li only held the dice cup and shook it according to the rules. Even her speed couldn't be considered fast. It was quiet in the pavilion. Only the sound of the dice being shaken and colliding could be heard. However, Han Mingshi's relaxed smile gradually turned serious. Even his body, which was leaning lazily, straightened up and stared at Yi Li's calm face. He actually couldn't hear the number that the dice could get. However, he wasn't too worried about winning or losing. 33 points was the highest number that could be rolled. Unless the youth in front of him imitated his methods, he wouldn't be able to win against him. Peng. Yi Li placed the dice cup back on the table. She looked at Han Mingshi with a smile and said, "Young Master Han, do you want to guess how many points it is?" Han Mingshi gave her a disdainful look and said, "You can't win against this young master no matter how many points it is. Open it. Let this young master see just how strong young Master Chu is." Yi Li raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Young Master Han is right." She slowly opened the dice cup. The 3 dice were perfectly intact on the table. But, the 3 dice were all placed on the table with one corner tip, and the other inclined side leaned against each other. Each dice had 2 sides facing up. These 2 sides happened to be 5 and 6. In other words, Yi Li also had 33 points. Yi Li said with a faint smile, 33 points. "It's a draw. Young Master Han, what do you think?" Han Mingshi stared at her. After a while, he said in a deep voice, "You win. Tell me what you want." With a wave of his hand, the dice cup and the 3 dice were sent to the treasure cabinet on the side. Han Mingshi raised his voice and said, "Serve the tea." In the pavilion, Yi Li was tasting the best quality tea that had just been served with satisfaction. The Wind and Moon Pavilion was indeed the best place in the world to enjoy life. Even the tea here was comparable to the tribute from the palace. Han Mingshi stared at Yi Li with a deep gaze. "Young Master Chu, can you tell me why you're looking for the Qiani Pavilion's master now?" Yi Li put down the teacup and said with a faint smile, "It's actually not a big deal. I'm going to Nanjiang in the near future, so I need some information. Since the Qiani Pavilion claims to be the best intelligence organization in Da State, I have no choice but to shamelessly ask for your help." Han Mingshi's expression softened after being flattered by someone who was on par with him. He snorted softly and said, "Young Master Chu, you're quite well informed since you know the relationship between the Wind and Moon Pavilion and the Qiani Pavilion. Why would you need the Qiani Pavilion's help?" Yi Li smiled helplessly and said, "Knowing this was just an accident. I hope young Master Han doesn't blame me for being presumptuous. Of course, since the Qiani Pavilion sells intelligence for a living, I'll certainly pay the Qiani Pavilion's satisfaction." Han Mingyu narrowed his almond-shaped eyes. He leaned back and looked at Yi Li leisurely. "Oh, satisfy the Qiani Pavilion. It seems young Master Chu is very confident in yourself." Yi Li smiled and said, "I believe that since the Qiani Pavilion is open for business, you won't ask for a sky-high price, right?" Young Master Chu, you're not planning to use the money you won from the Wind and Moon Pavilion to pay the Qiani Pavilion, are you? I wouldn't dare. I happen to own 2 shops in Guangling City. Although they are newly opened, I'm sure young Master Han will be interested in them. Yi Li calmly drank her tea and looked at Han Mingxi with a smile. Han Mingxi frowned slightly. His slightly devilishly handsome face inadvertently gave off a seductive aura. Although Yi Li wasn't affected by him, it didn't stop her from praising him in her heart. She clearly looked very similar to Han Mingyu, but their temperaments were too different. Young Master Chu, are you talking about the fragrance shop called Aromatic Elegance Pavilion that opened on Xuanwu Street half a year ago? Han Mingxi asked with an obvious probing tone. Yi Li nodded and said, that's right. I'm sure young Master Han knows how much money the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion can make. As long as young Master Han can provide me with information that satisfies me, I'll give you the money. If you can provide me with the information you need, I can give young Master Han 20% of the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion's profits every year. Every year? Han Mingxi raised his eyebrows and said, then can I understand that young Master Chu is talking about long-term cooperation? The Aromatic Elegance Pavilion does make a lot of money, but it doesn't seem to be enough to become a long-term partner of the Qiani Pavilion. Of course, he knew about the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion. In fact, the fragrance he was currently using came from the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion. Ever since he started using the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion's fragrance, other fragrances were no longer attractive to him. The Aromatic Elegance Pavilion had only opened in Guangling City for half a year, but its popularity had already surpassed all the old cosmetics and fragrance shops in Guangling City. However, because the price was more than 3 times more expensive than the ordinary shops, it wasn't very popular among ordinary people. However, Han Mingxi was sure that at least 70% of the noble ladies in Guangling City used the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion's fragrance. If the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion was willing to lower its price, it was only a matter of time before it dominated the fragrance industry. Yi Li smiled and shook her head. Young Master Han, do you know who's the easiest to earn money from in this world? Chapter 165. Han Mingxi furrowed his brows. Of course it's the rich merchants. The Breeze and Moon restaurant's astonishing annual income was provided by these rich merchants. Yi Li waved the hand holding the folding fan and smiled. No, it's women. Women? Han Mingxi snorted. Women had no source of income and were completely dependent on men. Thus, they were destined to be unable to spend money as recklessly as men. Moreover, there were very few women who could be as generous as men. Yi Li sighed softly and played with the folding fan in her hand absent-mindedly. She smiled and said, in this world, there are more women than men. However, not all men like to eat, drink, whore, and gamble, but all women are destined to be young and beautiful. Even for the female soldiers in her previous life, even if they did not lose to men on the battlefield, their first choice would always be clothing and cosmetics stores. Han Mingxi's heart skipped a beat. He did not have his brother's astonishing talent and acumen when it came to business, nor was he obsessed with money. However, this did not mean that he was an idiot. Naturally, he understood some of the meaning behind her words. Han Mingxi gave Yi Li a look that signaled her to continue. He reached out his hand and poured tea for himself and Yi Li. It was clear that he was interested in this topic. Yi Li did not mind. The fragrance formula of the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion is absolutely confidential. It is not something that can be made by just any cosmetics store. To be honest, I don't really like the quality of the cosmetics and fragrances in DHU state. I believe that young Master Han is also not satisfied, right? Han Mingxi furrowed his brows. He did not feel anything. However, ever since the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion appeared, he felt that the fragrances he used in the past were not that good. Although he privately had people who made their own fragrances, the time and energy spent on them far exceeded the value of the fragrances themselves. Occasionally, he would give the fragrances from the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion to his female friends. Those beautiful ladies also clearly showed their preference for the fragrances from the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion. Han Mingxi didn't want to admit that he might have indirectly attracted a lot of customers for the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion. Yi Li looked at Han Mingxi with satisfaction as he lowered his head in thought. She continued, although there is only one Aromatic Elegance Pavilion in Guangling City, from Sir Han's perspective, it is impossible for me to open one in every large and medium-sized city in Dhu State. Perhaps, including Shilling, Northern Tribes, and Nanjiang, or even places further away. After all, where there were women, there was no need to worry about not being able to sell. What do you think? Han Mingxi felt that he was a little frightened by this young boy who was obviously not even 15 years old. He believed that if his brother who loved money as much as his life was here, he would have a lot to talk about with him. Opening a Aromatic Elegance Pavilion in each town seemed to be a great idea. Han Mingxi started to imagine if he could open a Breeze and Moon restaurant in each town, then, I advise young Master Han not to think that way. Otherwise, I'm afraid young Master Mingyu will be angry. Seeing Han Mingxi holding his chin and looking outside the pavilion with shining eyes, Yi Li guessed what he was thinking. She quickly stopped him. The Breeze and Moon restaurant could only become the #1 restaurant in the world because it was unique. If he opened it everywhere, it wouldn't be so wonderful. She didn't believe that Han Mingyu didn't open brothels in other places. It was just that they weren't that famous. Moreover, the brothel business didn't require much skill. Perhaps one could become a leader in it, but it was hard to say that one could completely dominate it. Cosmetics and spices are consumables, but the Breeze and Moon restaurant, that's for entertainment. Aren't the two completely different? But I think that we can cooperate on this point. Han Mingxi was just being impulsive. If he really opened a Breeze and Moon restaurant all over the Dhu state, he probably wouldn't be able to stand it and run away. Hearing Yi Li's words, he didn't have any objections. He raised his eyebrows to show that he was all ears. Yi Li said with a smile, for example, the spices and cosmetics used by the ladies of the Breeze and Moon restaurant can be purchased from the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion. What does young Master Han think? As a show of sincerity for our first cooperation, I can give young Master Han a special fragrance that will be provided for free for an unlimited period of time. How about it? Han Mingxi pondered for a moment. He raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, young Master Chu is so sincere. If I don't agree, wouldn't I be pushing the business out of the door? Very good. What information does young Master Chu need? I think it will make young Master feel that it's worth it. Yi Li nodded with satisfaction. Very good. Then why don't young Master Han prepare first? I also need to make some preparations. Let's meet again in a few days and sign a contract. It's a deal. Leaving the Breeze and Moon restaurant, San finally let out a sigh of relief when they returned to an inconspicuous small courtyard in Guangling City where the 5 of them were temporarily staying. In front of his brothers who were looking at him strangely, San expressionlessly took out a thick stack of silver banknotes and threw it on the table. Who was responsible for managing the silver raised his eyebrows in shock. Where did you get so much banknotes? They had only brought 20,000 taels out of Jing. This Wang Fei took Xiao San out for a walk and it was 10 times that. San looked at Yi Li who was sitting on the side and drinking tea with a fan. He said woodenly, we won it at the gambling house. Finishing, he looked with lingering fear at Yi Li and said, young Master, this subordinate didn't think that we would be able to walk out safely from there. Yi Li glanced at him and said with a smile, don't worry. If the Breeze and Moon restaurant makes trouble for us for a mere 200,000 taels, then it won't be very good. A mere 200,000 taels? Even if the Breeze and Moon restaurant earned 200,000 taels a day, it definitely wasn't a small amount. Breeze and Moon restaurant. Yi, and San's lips twitched. They all decided to forget about this matter. They were Wang Fei's shadow guards, so they definitely would not tell the prince that Wang Fei had taken San to a brothel. Yi Li wasn't in a hurry to find Han Mingxi. If she wanted to completely cover her tracks, she needed intelligence from Nanjiang. In reality, Yi Li hadn't planned on finding Tianyi Pavilion. Even though Han Mingxi and Han Mingyu seemed to be easy to get along with, even though she had only met them once, Yi Li knew that Han Mingyu, that gentle Gongzi, was more than 10 times harder to deal with than his flower thief younger brother. If she didn't know that Han Mingyu wasn't in DHU state recently, Yi Li definitely wouldn't have come into contact with Han Mingxi. However, even though Han Mingxi didn't seem very reliable, Tianyi Pavilion's intelligence network was still very fast. When Yi Li had just finished walking around Guangling City, Han Mingxi had already come to her door. Seeing Han Mingxi, who was wearing a dark red robe and constantly exuding a seductive aura, leisurely sitting in the parlor and teasing the servant girl who brought tea over, Yi Li waved her hand to dismiss the red-faced servant girl. She said with a smile, "Not seeing you for a few days, young Master Han is still as elegant as ever." Han Mingxi said with a smile, "Not at all. But young Master Chu, do you find the spring scenery of Guangling pleasing to your eyes?" Yi Li didn't expect Han Mingxi to not send people to monitor her. She wasn't angry and smiled calmly. The ancient capital of 3 dynasties, the scenery is picturesque. How can it not be pleasing to my eyes? Han Mingxi said with a smile, "Speaking of which, young Master Chu forgot something a few days ago. I happened to be here today, so I brought it over. It will also show my sincerity in cooperating." Chapter 166. Yi Li raised her eyebrows in confusion and looked at Han Mingxi, who was smiling maliciously. Han Mingxi raised his hand and clapped lightly. Not long after, a beautiful woman dressed in purple appeared at the door. This lowly concubine Rumei greets young Master and young Master Chu. This woman was Miss Rumei, who was the banker at the gambling house a few days ago. Yi Li suddenly had a bad feeling. "Young Master Han, this is..." Han Mingxi opened his folding fan with a swoosh. Half of his handsome face was hidden behind the folding fan. He smiled and said, "The rules of the Wind and Moon House are that whoever wins gets to be the banker. Young Master Chu's gambling skills are superb and even Rumei is convinced." From today onwards, Rumei was no longer a member of the Wind and Moon Inn, nor was she a member of the Wind and Moon Inn. She belongs to young Master Chu. If young Master Chu likes her, you can take her as a concubine. If you don't like her, she can be a servant girl who serves tea, does the laundry, and cooks. Seeing Han Mingxi smiling ambiguously and winking at her, Yi Li felt a headache coming on. Young Master Han is too polite. I was just lucky. Besides, I didn't bet with Miss Rumei alone. I didn't win against her. Therefore, you should take Miss Rumei back. Han Mingxi closed her fan and casually tapped her palm. Does young Master Chu mean that you don't like our Yumai? Hearing Han Mingxi's words, Miss Rumei's charming face turned pale. She looked at Yi Li with hidden bitterness and stood to the side with her head lowered, silently crying. Yi Li glared at Han Mingxi unhappily. Young Master Han, since everyone is sincere, why do you have to tease me like this? I have a strict upbringing. I can only thank young Master Han for his good intentions. Han Mingxi sighed and looked at Yi Li with a face full of resentment. Your heart is like iron. Forget it. Are you my? It seems that young Master Chu really doesn't think highly of you. You may leave. Are you my? Snorted softly. She stomped her foot and glared hatefully at Yi Li before turning around and leaving. Yi Li smiled bitterly in her heart. If she really did send a brothel girl back, not to mention how her grandfather and uncle would react, even Mo Xiaoyao would fly into a rage. Mo Xiaoyao. Yi Li sighed softly in her heart as she recalled the sadness in his eyes when he left, even though he tried his best to hide it. Is young Master Chu thinking of someone? Han Mingxi propped up his chin and stared curiously at Yi Li. If he wasn't mistaken, he saw some sort of longing or worry in this shrewd and mysterious youth's eyes. Is young Master Han here to discuss such private matters with this one? Yi Li glanced at him and asked indifferently. Han Mingxi shrugged and frowned indifferently. I have nothing to do now. There's no harm in talking about it. That's perfect. Why don't young Master Han also talk about his romantic past? I've been interested in dialogue books recently. Why don't I write one and call it The Biography of Young Master Feng Yu? Yi Li smiled from the corner of her eyes. You're indeed very boring, Han Mingxi muttered. Since Chu Junwei knew about the relationship between the Wind and Moon Pavilion and the Tianyi Pavilion, then it wasn't so strange that he knew that young Master Ming Yu's younger brother, Han Mingxi, was the infamous young master Feng Yu. However, he didn't look down on him like most people would when he knew about his reputation. Han Mingshi felt that this person was rather interesting. We're considered acquaintances. Young master coming and going, that's boring. Why don't we just address each other by name? I'll call you Junwei. You can just call me Mingshi. Yi Li blinked lightly. Junwei? Mingshi? Why did she feel that this name was a bit strange? Brother Han. Yi Li stared at him warningly, reminding him that it was time to get down to business. All right, Junwei, are you shy? Han Mingshi blinked his seductive eyes and smiled. Before Yi Li flared up, he put on a serious expression and said, I've roughly found the things you want. However, you also know that we're in the Da Chu state. Most of the people you want to investigate are in Nanjiang. Thus, I only have a portion here. The rest will be delivered to you after you enter Nanjiang. However, I'm rather curious. Junwei, you're still young. Why would you want to go to Nanjiang for no reason? Even if you're going to travel, there doesn't seem to be a need to investigate the Nanzhao imperial family and the saintess of Nanjiang. Yi Li's expression didn't change as she said, to tell you the truth, I'm going to Nanjiang to search for a medicine. This medicine seems to have something to do with the Nanzhao imperial family and Nanjiang. Han Mingshi raised his eyebrows and said somewhat jokingly, Junwei, you're generous, and I'm not stingy. What medicine do you want? Just tell me and I'll have someone get it for you. Why do you have to come all the way here? Don't tell me you want Nanjiang's treasure, the hidden Luoming flower? Yi Li nodded seriously. That's right. The smile on Han Mingshi's face froze. He sighed helplessly. You're also. The hidden Luoming flower is Nanjiang's treasure. It's personally guarded by the saintess of Nanjiang. Not to mention ordinary people, even the Nanzhao king may not be able to take it. Junwei, are you sure you want to go? Yi Li nodded firmly. If not, why would I pay such a high price to buy information from the Tianyi Pavilion? The trip to Nanjiang is imperative, so I'll have to trouble Brother Han to help me prepare the information. Otherwise, if I don't come back, you'll have one less business partner. As far as I know, although the hidden Luoming flower is said to have the effect of bringing the dead back to life, I don't know if anyone has used it to bring the dead back to life. However, I do know that the people who want to take it have all died. Is Junwei someone you want to take it from? Han Mingshi asked worriedly. What kind of disease or poison is it? Maybe I can help you find out if there's any other way. Seeing Han Mingshi so worried, Yi Li felt a little guilty. She hurriedly said, No need. I'm just doing my best. If I really can't do it, I won't take the risk to die. Han Mingshi nodded and said, It's good that you think so. Nanjiang is not like the Central Plains. Even our Tianyi Pavilion can't do anything in the southern border. That's right. You're right. I understand. Thank you, Brother Han. Yi Li nodded and took out a delicate glass bottle from a box on the table. It was half filled with a light green liquid. This is what I promised Brother Han. I hope Brother Han will be satisfied. Han Mingshi took it curiously. Once he opened the glass bottle, an elegant fragrance of flowers floated out and filled the hall. Han Mingshi said happily, This is the fragrance of orchids. Although this smell doesn't seem to suit Brother Han's taste, we can only make do with it for now. Yi Li didn't quite understand why a man would make himself so fragrant. However, she still decided to respect the personal preferences of her new business partner. Han Mingshi didn't care at all. He held the glass bottle and couldn't put it down. How can it be? It's really great. Thank you, Junwei. The cosmetics and fragrances for the Wind and Moon Pavilion and the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion that Junwei mentioned before are settled. In the future, all the cosmetics and fragrances for the Wind and Moon Pavilion will be ordered from the Aromatic Elegance Pavilion. Yi Li nodded and said with a smile, Thank you, Brother Han. Chapter 167. No need to thank me, no need to thank me. We can be considered to be mutually beneficial. Junwei, can you give me something with a stronger scent next time? This seems to be much better than other fragrances. If we sell it in the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion, We'll definitely make more money. Yi Li's mouth twitched. This isn't easy to get. Including the bottle in Brother Han's hand, there are only 5 bottles in the Fragrant Elegance Pavilion. Also, Brother Han, I actually have a question I've always wanted to ask. Ask whatever you want. This brother will tell you everything he knows. Having received such a good item, Han Mingxi's mood was rarely good. He waved his hand without a care. Yi Li looked at him. With your occupation, is it really convenient to make such a fragrant smell? If it was an ordinary household, it would be fine. If the flower was picked in a heavily guarded or martial arts household, as long as their nose wasn't broken, wouldn't they be able to smell it? Han Mingxi stared blankly. It took him a while to understand what Yi Li meant by occupation. He unhappily glared at her. You're still a little brat. You don't understand the elegance of a man. You don't know how much the beauties like this young master's fragrance. Yi Li was speechless. Did he think she had never seen a man before? The 5 brothers of the Shu family, as well as Mo Xiaoyao, Feng Zhiyao, and Mo Jingli. At most, they would only put some faint fragrances on their clothes, such as dragonfly, musk, or sandalwood. Probably because Mo Xiaoyao stayed in the study for a long time, he only had a faint ink fragrance. She had never seen a man use such a showy fragrance. Why didn't he make himself into a big incense burner? After promising to see if she could concoct better fragrances for him when she returned from Nanjiang, she sent off the reluctant Han Mingxi. Yi Li then sat down to look at the things Han Mingxi had sent over. Young master, when are we leaving for Nanjiang? Dark 3 and Dark 4 fiddled with the things that Yi Li had just bought, while looking at Yi Li, who was sitting on the side looking at files. Yi Li didn't even raise her head as she stared at the file in her hand and said, the matters in Guangling are more or less settled. We will leave the day after tomorrow. Take a look at these things as well. Casually tossing out a few pieces of paper, Dark 1 and Dark 2 caught them and sat down on the side to read them attentively. Also, I'll be leaving the day after tomorrow. Only one of you can come with me. The 4 people simultaneously stopped what they were doing and looked in shock at Yi Li's calm face. Wang Fei. Gongzi, this. And Yi said with a frown. Nanjiang couldn't compare to the Central Plains. They were unfamiliar with the place and it was too dangerous for the princess consort to bring only one person. Yi Li looked up at them with a smile and said, don't you think the 5 of us are very eye-catching? The people of Southern Border are very xenophobic. I'm afraid that our group will be targeted as soon as we enter Southern Border. But it's too dangerous for young master to bring only one person. If something happens. And San said, do you not believe in me or do you not believe in yourselves? Yi Li asked with a raised brow. The 4 people looked at each other and couldn't say anything to refute. Yi Li said with a smile, all right, it's decided. And San will come with me. And Sai, you stay behind and secretly watch Wind and Moon Restaurant. If Han Mingyu comes back or makes any movements, immediately send a message to me. Be careful and don't let him find you. And Yi, go to Shattered Snow Pass and find a way to infiltrate the military camp. If I don't send a message to you, you don't need to pay attention to anything else. No matter if you see any of us or the people in the Wang Fu, just pretend you don't know. Secretly pay attention to the situation in Ling Province. And set out tonight and take my token to Nanjiang to find Dage. After you find him, just follow him. The 4 people saw that Yi Li had already planned this and could only nod in agreement. Yi Li smiled at them, unless it's absolutely necessary, you're not allowed to contact Jing. I think, you all know what it means to be absolutely necessary, right? The 4 people helplessly agreed. And San had a bitter expression and drooped his head. The other 3 people also looked at him with sympathy. He would definitely be cut to pieces by the prince. Yi Li didn't have the mind to pay attention to the feelings of her subordinates. She stared at the file on the Saintess of Nanjiang and pondered. The Saintess of Nanjiang wasn't like she thought before, with no real power. On the contrary, the Saintess of Nanjiang had a considerable influence on Nanzhao's political affairs. In some aspects, she was even more influential than the Nanzhao royal family. However, the Saintess couldn't marry and have children. Every time a new Saintess appeared, The previous saintess had to enter the Nanjiang sacred land to protect the hidden Luoming flower. She couldn't take a step out of the sacred land and couldn't see outsiders. So the threat to the royal power wasn't that sharp. The current saintess was called Xu Manlin, 23 years old this year. According to Nanjiang's rules, the saintess had to abdicate at the age of 28 at the latest. Yi Li frowned. She secretly guessed that the reason the saintess of Nanjiang wanted to rebel was because of this. After all, a 28-year-old young woman who had enjoyed supreme honor was locked in some unknown sacred land. Moreover, she wasn't allowed to see outsiders. No matter who it was a very cruel thing. Gongzi, are we really going to get the hidden Luoming flower? And San saw Yi Li staring at the file on the saintess of Nanjiang and couldn't help but ask curiously. Yi Li casually replied, if we can get it, naturally it's good to get it. However, the affairs of Nanjiang still come first. Finally, she first asked whether the hidden Luoming flower was useful to Mo Xiuyao's body. Then she decided whether to go get it or not. Nanjiang had been a barbarian land since ancient times. Its customs were very different from the Central Plains. Its territory was full of poisonous insects, poisonous grass, fierce birds, and beasts. The people of the Central Plains avoided it like the plague. 1,000 years ago, Nanjiang and the Central Plains were one. It was called Kuei Province in ancient times. In the late years of the previous dynasty, Nanzhao's royal family rose and established Nanzhao State. After that, Emperor Taizu established Dachu State and fought all his life. When Emperor Taizong was free, Nanzhao State had been established for over 100 years. Its foundation was stable. The Central Plains also urgently needed to recuperate after several decades of war. Nanjiang was officially independent of Dachu State's territory. Shattered Snow Pass was located at the border between Nanjiang and Dachu State's Yong Province. Although the two countries were at war, the people on the border still traded with each other. 30 li behind Shattered Snow Pass, Yonglin City often saw Nanjiang people dressed strangely going in and out. Yonglin City wasn't big. Because it was 200 li away from Yong Province's capital, Yong Province City, it didn't look prosperous. Apart from the people in the crowd who were obviously of different races, this place was just like an ordinary small town. Yi Li stood on the street that wasn't very wide. Looking at the peaceful people coming and going, she smiled faintly in her heart. In such an era, living in such a small border city, it was indeed very rare to have such peace and harmony. Or it should be said that the ability of the common people to adapt to life and the environment was always unexpected. And San stood next to Yi Li with his sword. He looked strangely at his master standing at the door of the inn and smiling strangely instead of going in. Gongzi, there don't seem to be many inns in Yonglin City. This one is already the best. Yi Li glanced at him and shook her head with a smile. Go in. It's not that I don't like the inn. After saying that, he took the lead and stepped into the seemingly simple and crude inn. And San raised an eyebrow. He also felt that Wang Fei wouldn't dislike the environment for being too bad. After all, there were times when they didn't reach the next town on the road. Sometimes, they would sleep in the wilderness. Also, when they were in Jing, there were places under Black Cloud Peak that even the Shadow Guard didn't want to set foot in, but Wang Fei went in without blinking. Chapter 168. Entering the inn, compared to the magnificent inns in the Chu capital and Guangling City, this small inn couldn't even be considered a third-rate inn. However, this was indeed the best inn in Yonglin City. There were only 7 or 8 tables in the lobby. At this time, 3 of the tables were already occupied. An old shopkeeper had his head down as he calculated the accounts at the counter. Although Yi Li was wearing a simple cotton dress, her age, appearance, and temperament, as well as the imposing and San following behind her with a sword in his arms, attracted everyone's attention in the inn. At this time, whether it was sightseeing or doing business, it wasn't a good time, so the inn seemed a bit deserted. Yi Li walked to the counter and lightly knocked twice. The old shopkeeper trembled as he raised his head to look at Yi Li and San for a long time before asking, "Does young master want to stay?" Yi Li smiled, "Not staying, Are we here to drink tea? The old shopkeeper smiled and said, What is young master's name? How many rooms do you want? Two upper rooms. The old shopkeeper called the waiter to bring the two to the room upstairs. After sending the waiter away, San skillfully checked the entire room. In this kind of small inn, even the upper rooms wouldn't be spacious or gorgeous. It was just a bed, a wardrobe, and a screen separating the tables and chairs outside. San stood by the door and watched Yi Li skillfully arrange her things. She frowned and asked, Young master, when are we going to Nanjiang? Yi Li put down her luggage and came out from behind the screen. She pointed to a chair on the side and indicated for San to sit. She smiled and said, This kind of thing can't be rushed. I think we need a guide. For people who entered Nanjiang for the first time, it was simply playing with their lives if they didn't do enough homework. And Yi Li didn't like to take risks if it wasn't necessary. Guide. San didn't understand. Yi Li smiled and said, Nanjiang is too mysterious for us in the Middle Earth. We're not familiar with the place and it's not easy to go. Finding a Nanjiang native or someone from Daechu State who is familiar with Nanjiang to lead the way is a good choice. Third Secret frowned, but bringing an outsider might drag us down. Yi Li tapped the table absent-mindedly with her fan and said, That's why we still have to wait. I've already asked someone to find a guide. It's a pity that he seems to be 2 days later than us. Looking at San's puzzled expression, Yi Li smiled but didn't say anything. Indicating that San could go back to his room to rest, San knew his master's temper. If she didn't want to say it, he wouldn't be able to get an answer even if he racked his brains. She could only get up and return to her room with a gloomy face. Watching San leave with a smile, Yi Li took out the files sent by the Tianyi Pavilion from her luggage and continued reading. After getting the benefits, Han Mingxi was very reliable. Along the way to the south, she would receive a large amount of information about the southern Xinjiang from the Tianyi Pavilion almost every few days. Yi Li was already used to reading all the things she received, memorizing them in her mind, and then destroying the evidence. The one in her hand now should be the last one before entering the southern Xinjiang. Along the way, the general situation of the southern Xinjiang also gradually formed an impression in her mind, but how much of it was real would have to be verified after entering the southern Xinjiang. After skimming through the thick file in her hand, Yi Li calmly burned the file that was filled with handwriting to the ground. Early in the morning, Yi Li got up early as usual and went downstairs. There were already 2 tables in the lobby downstairs, one of which was San sitting against the wall. Seeing Yi Li come down, San hurriedly got up. Gongzi. Yi Li nodded and smiled. So early? San was silent. Usually, with the others together, there was no need to be so early, but right now he was the only one following. Although he knew that the Gongzi wasn't without the ability to protect himself, he still couldn't help but worry. How could Yi Li not understand his thoughts? Smiling helplessly, Don't be so nervous, if you keep on like this, I'm afraid you'll collapse before we even enter the southern Xinjiang. Does it give you a lot of pressure to follow me? San shook his head. No, this subordinate thanks the Gongzi for your trust. It was just that he and the others grew up together. He was only a little older than Ansai, but his temperament wasn't as steady as Ansai's. So he was used to listening to An Yi and An Er's opinions. Now that he was the only one, it was inevitable that he wasn't used to it. Yi Li nodded with a smile, sitting down and calling the waiter to order breakfast. To Gongzi, are you also planning to go to the southern Xinjiang? Yi Li was calling San to eat breakfast when a man at the opposite table stood up and asked. Hearing this, Yi Li put down the chopsticks in his hand and looked up to size up the person. His figure was tall and sturdy, and his appearance was average. Although he tried his best to show kindness to the two, it was hard to hide the evil aura between his brows. San reached out and grabbed the sword on the table. Yi Li raised his hand to press down on the sword, inadvertently patting it. San frowned and looked at the person before taking back his hand and lowering his head to continue eating. The two people's actions were naturally seen clearly by the person who came. He didn't mind and smiled. This brother doesn't need to be nervous. We are also going to the southern Xinjiang, so we wanted to ask if Gongzi wanted to go together. The man pointed to the 3 people at the opposite table and smiled. Yi Li glanced over there. An old man in his 50s or 60s who looked like a wealthy merchant. His body was covered in gorgeous and expensive clothing, as well as the jade thumb ring on his finger. He also held a gold abacus in his hand. He just didn't write "I'm very rich, come rob me." Next to him was a middle-aged man who looked like a housekeeper and a sickly young scholar. This kind of combination could definitely be called eye-catching. At first, Yi Li was a bit worried that she and San would attract too much attention. Only after seeing these people did she realize that she was too much of a disgrace. Speaking of which, those who had the guts to go to the hinterland of the southern Xinjiang weren't trash. Yi Li looked at San and smiled. "I'm just afraid that we will cause trouble for you." The man smiled. "How could that be? I see that this brother's skills aren't bad. I've also been to the southern Xinjiang a few times. It's very evil. If we have a few more people, we can take care of each other, right?" The man looked at San and then turned his gaze back to Yi Li. It was clear that Yi Li was the one who could make the decision, but he couldn't see the depth of the youth in front of him. He could only secretly guess whether or not some family's young master who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth came out to play with his guards. "We plan to go to the capital of Nanzhao. There shouldn't be any danger along the way. I wonder who you are." Yi Li narrowed her eyes and smiled. Her smile was innocent and kind. The man laughed loudly. "We are also going to the capital of Nanzhao." Ai's road to the capital of Nanzhao was quite peaceful. However, since last year, it's been a bit mysterious. Our master is going to Nanzhao to do some medicine business. If Gongzi doesn't mind, why don't we go together? The rich merchant sitting across from them glanced at Yi Li arrogantly. However, the young man with a sickly face smiled and nodded at the two. Yi Li lowered her eyebrows and smiled. She tactfully declined. "I only heard that Nanzhao's scenery is unique. That's why I plan to travel and broaden my horizons. Therefore, I found a guide in advance. It's just that he'll be 2 days late." Seeing Yi Li refuse, the man didn't force it. He only smiled and said, "Since it's like this, then I'll have to bother Gongzi. We might as well meet again in the capital of Nanzhao." Yi Li nodded slightly and watched the man return to the seat across from them. Across from them, the rich merchant scolded the man for being meddlesome and spoke disdainfully to Yi Li. Yi Li didn't care and smiled faintly and lowered her head to eat breakfast. Chapter 169. Once the table of guests left, San raised his head and said, "Young master, be careful of those people." Yi Li raised her eyebrows and asked, "You know them?" San nodded and then shook his head, saying, "I know that sickly scholar." Yi Li looked at San, somewhat curious as to how he could know this sickly scholar who had almost never left the capital. "It seems like that sickly scholar's identity isn't simple." San nodded and said, "His nickname is Sickly Scholar, no one knows what his real name is. Including Tianyi Pavilion." Yi Li lowered her head and thought about the sickly scholar she saw just now. He didn't look like a top expert and didn't have anything special about him. How did San see through his identity? San said, "He is Shilling Country's Yangwang Chamber's 3rd pavilion master. A few years ago, almost all of the assassin organizations received the mission to assassinate the prince, including Yang Prince. Quite a few of our shadow guard died in his hands. However, he was also hit by Prince's palm and damaged his heart meridian. His original fake illness became a real illness. Did young master notice his right hand just now? Sickly scholar is good at poison. The color of his left hand's fingernails is different from normal people's. Others only think that his body is sick. In fact, he was already like this long before he was injured by Prince. That hand is caused by his years of practicing poison. It's incomparably strange poison." Yi Li lowered her head and recalled. Sure enough, she remembered that the scholar's left hand that was hidden in his sleeve was slightly exposed when he stood up. It really did seem to be dark red. Refining his own hand into poison? Isn't he afraid of poisoning himself to death? Yi Li didn't understand and felt that this method was meaningless. A body that was impervious to poison doesn't exist in a sense. It can only be said that some bodies have resistance to most poisons for some reason. If a person with poison all over could live peacefully, then Shenyang wouldn't have to spend so much effort to treat Mo Xiaoyao. After breakfast, Yi Li went out and strolled around Yonglin City. She also learned about the situation of Nanjiang and Shattered Snow Mountain Pass. When she returned in the evening, she saw that the group of 4 were still sitting in the same place eating dinner. Obviously, they didn't leave today. Sickly Scholar nodded at Yi Li in a friendly manner. Yi Li nodded back with a smile and prepared to head upstairs. Oh! When did such a fair and tender young master come to Yonglin City? Before Yi Li even stepped on the stairs, a vulgar voice came from the corner behind her. Yi Li slightly turned her body and saw a skinny young man dressed in Nanjiang clothes staring at her. His gaze was unbridled and full of lust. Even his small eyes that were like a mouse were full of turbid evil energy. She couldn't help but frown. In her previous life, including the underworld drug lords and terrorists she faced, she had never seen a person that tested a person's bottom line. And San suddenly turned his head and stared at the young man with a cold expression. With a warning gaze and killing intent, as long as this bastard dared to say another word, he would turn him into a ghost under his sword. How could this kind of scoundrel profane the princess of Ding royal estate? That young man obviously took San's warning as a provocation and became more complacent. San's vulgar gaze lingered on Yi Li's body. At the same time, he didn't forget to arrogantly smile at San. What are you looking at? Did this prince say something wrong? This boy has a powdery face. You Central Plains men all look like women. This boy is more like a woman than a woman. To be honest, Yi Li's disguise was very successful. Even if she looked prettier than most women, no one would suspect that she was a woman because of her age and bearing. Therefore, San naturally wouldn't waste his breath to say anything to that vulgar man. He directly pulled out his sword. The long sword was unsheathed and it flew straight towards that vulgar man. The other party obviously didn't expect San to attack without saying a word. That vulgar man was stunned for a moment as he saw that a hole was about to be pierced. The person beside him quickly pulled him away and with a wave of his hand, a slender thing pounced towards San. San snorted and the long sword in his hand drew out a sword flower. With 2 swish sounds, that thing broke into 3 pieces and fell to the ground. Everyone looked over and it turned out to be a poisonous snake. Although they didn't know what species it was, they knew that it was definitely a poisonous snake just by looking at the colorful pattern. San raised his eyebrows in disdain. Since they were going to Nanjiang, how could they not understand the tricks that the people of Nanjiang were used to? Those Nanjiang people's faces changed. Only that vulgar man still hooted, "You have big guts. Do you know who this prince is?" San curled his lips and sneered, "You dare to be so arrogant in Dhu state. Don't tell me you're a prince of Nanjiao. This prince remembers that the king of Nanjiao only has 2 daughters. That man wanted to say something but he could only swallow his words when he saw the long sword in San's hand. With a face full of anger, he took a few steps back until he was in the middle of the people accompanying him before he hooted, "Kill this boy for me." The people beside him were clearly in a difficult position as they muttered something to that man. Yi Li stood at the top of the stairs and listened with her eyes lowered. It sounded like the language of a minority in Yungui region in her previous life. And because Yi Li had been active in Yungui region for many years, she was familiar with the language of the minority in this region. Those followers were clearly trying to persuade their master that they were standing in Dhu state and it wasn't appropriate to kill people in broad daylight. But that vulgar man clearly refused to listen to their advice and insisted on killing San and capturing Yi Li. After a round of failed communication, the Nanjiang people looked at each other helplessly before surrounding San and Yi Li. When the people in the hall saw that a fight was about to break out, they all scattered like birds and beasts. Even Sickly Scholar's table was left with only him and the middle-aged man. That old shopkeeper was so scared that he hid behind the counter and didn't dare to come out. Yi Li frowned and said, "Throw them out. Don't break other people's things." San happily replied, "Yes, young master, who is so daring to make our young master Jun Wei angry." San was just about to make a move when a lazy voice with a trace of grease sounded from upstairs. Yi Li raised her head and saw a handsome man in loose dark red robes leaning against the railing upstairs. His every movement was full of flirtatious charm. Ivildor. Glancing at the dumbfounded vulgar man beside her who was drooling, Yi Li looked with a headache at young Master Feng Yu who was smiling at her. "Brother Han, why are you here?" Han Mingshi nimbly flipped himself over the railing and lightly landed on the stairs. He smiled and said, After thinking about it, I still don't feel at ease letting brother Jun Wei go to such a dangerous place like Nanjiang alone. It just so happens that Jun Wei also needs a guide, right?" Yi Li couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. "Brother Han, do you know the way to Nanjiao? You're looking down on me." Han Mingshi looked at Yi Li plaintively and said, "I've been to Nanjiao at least 7 or 8 times. I won't go the wrong way even with my eyes closed. Besides, I can protect Jun Wei if I follow. Look, I'm only bringing one person out. We haven't even stepped out of the Da Chu state and we've already met a lecher." Yi Li gritted her teeth. "Brother Han, I'm a man." Han Mingshi raised his eyebrows in surprise. He covered his mouth with his fan and laughed. "Jun Wei is young and doesn't know any better. Who said that men won't meet lechers? That idiot over there, don't you think so?" Chapter 170. That silly and wretched youth over there was already drooling as he nodded his head. Yi Li felt a wave of disgust as she turned her head to glare at Han Mingshi. She thought that this fellow only liked picking flowers, but it turned out that he liked both men and women. "Jun Wei, don't misunderstand. Even if this elder brother likes both men and women, I still wouldn't fancy this kind of trash. No matter what. It should be a handsome young master like Jun Wei." Han Mingshi winked at Yi Li, wanting to reach out and pinch Yi Li's little face. How could Yi Li let him have his way? She closed the fan in her hand and slapped his wrist. Han Mingshi's face immediately fell. Han Mingshi slowly walked down the stairs, his phoenix eyes lazily glancing at those southern border people. "Do you want to leave by yourselves or do you want this young master to invite you?" That wretched youth came forward and said with a smile, "Does this young master also want to go to the southern border? This young master is the young master of Luori tribe. How about this young master lead the way for you?" He imitated the way the people of the Central Plains spoke. However, when paired with his cloudy, squinted eyes, his skinny body, and his self-confident smile, it really made one's hair stand on end. Yi Li's lips twitched as she lamented Han Mingshi's luck with women. She then pulled San to her side. Since someone wanted to stand up for her, why should they make a move themselves? Han Mingshi's peach blossom eyes twitched as he spat out a word with an expressionless face, "Scram." He was dissolute, but it wasn't to the point where he didn't care about men and women. Even if he liked both men and women, he was still picky, okay? This wretched youth who claimed to be the young master of Luori tribe felt that he had been hurt. His original amazement and tenderness for the fairer sex instantly turned into anger. "Kill these 2 brats for me and bring them back." Yi Li was stunned. Just now, they wanted to kill San and bring her back. Now that this Ivildor Han Mingshi had appeared, they wanted to kill her and bring Han Mingshi back as well? What kind of situation was this? Han Mingshi's lips curled into a cold smile. "Get out of here right now. Or do you want General Murong to personally escort you out?" As soon as he said this, a hint of hesitation finally appeared in the wretched young man's eyes. Under the persuasion of the people around him, he snorted and ran out after leaving behind some harsh words. The hall was completely silent. Seeing that there was no fight, the old shopkeeper carefully stood up from the counter and apologized to the only remaining table of customers. Yi Li walked up the stairs and whispered to San to give the shopkeeper more money as compensation when paying the bill. Han Mingshi chuckled when he heard Yi Li's words. Junwei is really soft-hearted. That old shopkeeper has been running an inn in Yonglin for decades. What hasn't he encountered? Do you really think he's scared? Yi Li glanced at him and said indifferently, "It's a fact that he drove away his guests because of us. It had nothing to do with whether he was frightened or not." Brother Han, this is my room." Han Mingshi smiled. "Junwei, aren't you going to invite me in for a cup of tea? If you want to drink tea, why didn't you drink it in the hall?" Han Mingxi curled his lips in disgust. Drinking tea in that kind of place doesn't suit this young master's taste. I don't want to be poisoned in the middle of drinking. Junwei's luck is pretty good. You just went out and met the sickly scholar that everyone in Jianghu is afraid of. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and opened the door to let him in. She asked, "You know about sickly scholar? What is he doing in Nanjiang?" Han Mingxi shrugged and leaned back in his chair with his hands behind his head. He smiled at Yi Li and said, "Who knows? He was almost killed by Prince Ding a few years ago. It was the Yangwang Chamber's great pavilion master who personally came out to save his life. He hasn't come out for several years, and now he suddenly appeared in Nanjiang. Hihi, every time that guy appears, there will be rivers of blood. Junwei, don't be fooled by him. It's better to stay away from him." Yi Li nodded carelessly. Her mind had already turned elsewhere. "I don't know him, so I won't provoke him. But Brother Han, don't you need to guard the Wind and Moon Pavilion? How come you have time to come to Nanjiang?" Han Mingxi sneered, "The Wind and Moon Pavilion doesn't need me to guard it. It's more reassuring for me to guard Junwei. After all, Junwei's Aromatic Elegance Pavilion is the only property that belongs to me. If something happens to Junwei, this young master will lose a lot." While speaking seriously, his seductive phoenix eyes revealed a playful look. Yi Li looked at him calmly. "I have something to do in Nanjiang, so it's not convenient to take Brother Han with me." "It's okay. You don't have to take me. I'll just follow Junwei. If Junwei wants to climb a mountain of swords, I won't go down a sea of fire. How about it?" Han Mingxi smiled brightly. "I'm very useful. Don't you want to use the information of the Tianyi Pavilion? As long as I'm by your side, I can get any information of the Tianyi Pavilion at any time. It's much more convenient than waiting for the information to come to your door." Yi Li looked at him silently for a long time, then said, "I'm afraid that young Master Mingyu will find out that I took his brother into danger and accidentally kill me." At the mention of his brother, Han Mingxi's good mood suddenly became gloomy. He snorted coldly and said, "Don't talk to this young master about him. He doesn't even remember that he has a younger brother now. Sooner or later, he will die. At that time, this young master will go and collect his corpse." Yi Li's heart skipped a beat. Although she had schemed against Han Mingyu and escaped from him last time, Yi Li seemed to have an innate vigilance against him. As for Han Mingxi, who looked very similar to him, she didn't have this feeling at all. Perhaps it was because of Han Mingyu's ability to establish the Breeze and Moon Inn and the Tianyi Pavilion by himself. Perhaps it was because of the inexplicable grudge between him and Mo Xiaoyao. Perhaps it was because he was the first person who could truly threaten her. Yi Li calmly looked at the angry Han Mingxi and said indifferently, "Since you're worried, just go and take a look. Brother Han, why do you have to follow me everywhere? Not only is it dangerous, but if something happens to young Master Mingyu, Brother Han will regret it." Han Mingxi was startled, but he soon laughed. What can happen to him? There are only a few people in this world who can touch him. Moreover, he doesn't need my help. In his eyes, I'll only cause trouble. Yi Li rested her chin on her hand and looked at him with a smile. "I thought Brother Han and young Master Mingyu were brothers." Han Mingxi snorted and said, "In any case, this young master wants to follow you to Nanjiang. Even if you don't want me to, this young master will follow you. As for my big brother, you don't have to worry about him. He won't be back anytime soon, and the Breeze and Moon Inn won't collapse." Yi Li shrugged indifferently. If she said too much, it would only arouse his suspicions. Since they were going to be together for such a long time, she had to have a way to find out where Han Mingyu went. She hadn't forgotten that Han Mingyu had almost ruined her reputation for a woman related to Mo Xiaoyao. Who said she couldn't hold a grudge after apologizing? It was just that she didn't have to rush for revenge. As for using Han Mingxi, Yi Li glanced at the man who was smiling coquettishly. Who told him to be Han Mingyu's younger brother? Why did he have to bump into her? You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference. as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.